Good morning. Good morning, Your Worship. Good morning, Your Worship, councillors, committee members. Good morning and welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting this morning, the 9th of August 2018. We are streaming live this morning, so to those watching from afar, no mai haramai. Excuse me, we do have members of the public. Tēnā koutou, no mai haramai, welcome to our meeting this morning. And nobody from the press as yet, but ngā mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. We are being live streamed, so please, if you could use your microphones and speak into the microphone so everybody can hear us. And mobile phones, please turn them off and put away off the table. I will take regular breaks so that you can clear your messages when needed. Thank you. I am going to make a change to, well, we'll get to that in a minute. Only apologies, please. Carl, thank you. Declarations of interest? Yes, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Declare an interest in recommendation 5.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, so noted. Items not on the agenda, urgent items. Councillor Sturt.
Fortunate that the press aren't here this morning, but I think it's an opportune time. It's certainly not going to come on my agenda or certainly your agenda or full council's agenda, but I'm sensing a general disquiet out in our community as a result of front page attacks by a Tauranga-based editor on Rotorua. The headline last Saturday regarding gangs and crime is another negative headline, illustrates that what Councillor Gould was getting at when highlighting the negativity in Rotorua's Daily Post while he was overseas has been reinforced. I just want to suggest that the Mayor, the CEO and the executive team consult either the Press Council or the owners of the Rotorua Daily Post on what members of the public see as an orchestrated campaign which is having a huge adverse and negative impact on the perception of Rotorua as a progressive, growing and exciting place to work, live and play and invest in. And I leave that with you. I don't want to move a motion, but I think it's time that we took stock of the negative impact, not only on the front page, but in the letters to the editor, an orchestrated campaign day after day to put Rotorua down. And I think the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor and the executive team either need to meet with the Press Council, the owners of the Daily Post, and I know that you've already met the editor and got nowhere, so I just leave that with you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Sturt. I mean, it is a concern when you see things like that about the city that you love and that you want to support and see growth and see people supporting what Council in particular is doing for the benefit and well-being of the community. It's not an urgent item, obviously, but it's something that you've raised, and I suspect that the CEO, the Mayor, will look at this and see what they can do about that in regards to the media. I don't think we require any comment on that. Thank you very much. Thank you for raising it. Oh, excuse me. Confirmation of our minutes. The minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 12th of July 2018. May I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Sturt. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any changes, amendments? Carl, thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, thank you, carried. I'm going to just make a slight amendment, or sorry, change to the agenda this morning and move straight to recommendation 2, because we are waiting for someone to arrive, Subal Parvi to arrive, and so I'll just put back the staff report for probably the next 20 minutes or so. So if we could move straight to recommendation 2, please, which is on page 26 of our report. Thank you. Well, thank you. I'll just put the report. Thank you, Your Worship. That the report disposal of land, Service Lane, Fenton Street, be received. It's been moved by Her Worship, seconded by Councillor Hunt. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. And thank you. Good morning, Henry. Just to overview the report this morning. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, and kia ora koutou, councillors and committee members. So look, just very briefly, the decision we're really asking from the committee is to move this issue into the public consultation process under the Reserves Act. Very briefly, the background is about 10 years ago when a subdivision was carried out on this piece of land, a small strip was taken essentially to be used as a service lane. Since then, its use has not been needed, and now there are proposals for further development on the site, and the owners come to us asking whether the service lane reservation can be revoked. From a council perspective, we've got no issue with this. They've agreed they will take on any costs of the transfer and the revocation. So what we're asking for is that this go out for public consultation under the Reserves Act.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions? Any comments? Yes. Ms Mohi? Or Mr Berryman-Kemp? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report, and it does seem to be fairly straightforward to me, but the only thing that I couldn't gather from the report, I seem to recall a land disposal policy was approved in 2017 through this, and I'm unclear from the report whether there are any iwi or Māori interests in that land, and I know when we went through the land disposal policy that was part of the process. So I just wanted to confirm, in terms of the preparation of this recommendation, has the land disposal policy, which was approved in 2017, been applied to it?
Yes, it has, and we don't believe there are any iwi considerations. It was land that was part of the title pre-subdivision. It was taken 10 years ago and reserved as that small strip, and this is to go back into the title essentially.
Thank you. Ms Mohi?
Madam Chair, just following on from Eugene's question, what was the process that was undertaken? Was that through through the Māori policy team in council, or what?
No process as such, but that's consistent, we think, with the policy given the situation we've got here. We're talking about a small strip of driveway on a property.
Totally agree. When you look at the actual piece of land we're talking about, it's tiny, it makes a lot of sense, and it's very sense what's been proposed. And however, it's more about process. So just making sure that those processes we pushed to have done in 2017 were followed. So kia ora.
Thank you. Apply consistency, I think you're saying. Thank you, Ms Mohi. Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, thank you, Mr Weston, for your report. On page 27, you state 1 month after the first publication of the notice. I take it your notification is going to be in the Daily Post and not online. And the other item is, when are you going to notify? Because when do people have the ability to object if they want to object?
So this is obviously only a recommendation from the committee through to council, so it will need to go through to council and get endorsed. Look, it'll be as soon as possible after, and if council approve it. And the Reserves Act sets out the minimum requirements around consultation, and it does require notice in the local paper. And then people obviously can object and put their views in through the period that then opens.
Daily Post, not the New Zealand Herald.
Councillor Gould, thank you. I think we will leave that detail to staff. Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since this is going out to public notification and people have the right to object, I'm quite happy to move too.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Councillor Stewart.
Under the direction of the Auditor General, I'm not allowed to vote on such matters. However, I just want to get a handle on what we're actually doing here. This was a freehold title, privately owned. They 10 years ago, we were seeking to get a network of service lanes behind shops within the CBD. Obviously, without this 149 square metre service lane being incorporated back into Holmes's title, their ability to subdivide is going to be very limiting. Obviously, the service lane isn't servicing any other property and is sitting there idle. The issue is that when a service lane is acquired, does that automatically go in under the Reserves Act 1977 and stay there until surplus to requirements?
That's right, Councillor. Essentially, the Reserves Act, it becomes a local purpose service lane reserve. So, yeah, when the subdivision happens, that's the process that's followed. So the only way to get out of it again is to unlock it through the Reserves Act processes.
Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment on the redevelopment, really. I'm sure a lot of us will be sad to see the demise of Aroma Cafe down there when the sites are redeveloped.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt?
Thank you. I'll second the motion, and I too remember the plan to open up those service lanes and provide linkage. Unfortunately, the linkages here went through the middle of a swimming pool, so the ability to have access through the back of those properties was in fact nigh impossible, short of removing that, and that was obviously privately owned. So I fully support the recommendation. It was done in good faith at the time to open up those, but pragmatically this is the best response, and I think that knowing that the homes are going to do a development on that site, then I think that that's a good thing for the city, and I hope that, happy for it to go out to public consultation. I look forward to the resolution of that.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Donaldson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also don't have a question other than I guess it's commercially sensitive what the proposed development will be. However, the days of service lanes for shops in this part of the CBD have departed. You know, we've workshopped and been through the spatial plan, and we're looking at totally different developments to the days when we looked for service lanes in this area of our CBD, which is too large. Yeah, absolutely support.
Thank you for the discussion, councillors. I am going to put, we have a mover and a seconder, moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Hunt, that the committee recommends to council that the Fenton Street service lane situated between 1136 and 1138 Fenton Street is declared surplus to requirement and disposed of to the WD Homes 2000 Trust to assist with the redevelopment of their adjacent site following the revocation of reservation process pursuant to the Reserves Act 1977. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move to recommendation 4, just so that we can allow our guest to catch his breath. Good morning, Sir Bob. Nice to see you this morning. No mai, haere mai. So I'm going to go to recommendation 4 on page 76, that the report, Rotorua District Council Holdings Limited Annual Audit be received. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Moved by Councillor Tapsell, seconded by Councillor Gould. I'll put that motion. All those in favour that the report be received, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Good morning, Thomas, to present an overview of the report.
Good morning, Madam Chair, councillors and fellow board members. This item is a housekeeping item, unfortunately. So this relates to Rotorua District Council Holdings Limited, which was created some time ago as a vehicle to facilitate the T-Rex partnership with Scion many years ago. It has never been used and has previously had an exemption from providing a statement of intent and also undertaking a audit with Audit New Zealand. The reason for that is that there is absolutely no activity taking place in the past, currently, or there's no intention to do so going forward. So what we are asking, therefore, is to seek another exemption for another 3 years.
Thank you. Thomas, can I ask, although it was specifically set up for T-Rex, could it be used for anything else that we might have coming down the pipeline?
Yes, and that is one of the reasons why the company is being retained, even though it is inactive, that it has the potential to be used in the future if required.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I right in thinking that the directors of that company are some councillors, or has that changed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a number of us were, if I'm not, I think we all were. Can't remember actually.
All the councillors are effectively the directors of the company, yes.
No,
Has been in the past, yes.
that's right. I think that was a few years ago now, if I recall. Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Chair, thank you for your report, Thomas. I'll use your words, activity taking place. That means if some activity happens on that account, will then the accounts come through in a usual process being reported and audited?
That would be correct, but I think as Councillor Kent highlighted, that the directors of the company are the councillors, so therefore any activity that would take place would be at obviously the council's instruction, and so at this stage there is obviously the likelihood of that taking place is fairly remote. So if the circumstances were to change, then obviously the company would prepare a statement of intent to indicate to the public and to the council as to what it would be undertaking, and then would undertake said activity and also therefore prepare an annual report.
Oh, sorry. No further discussion. Thank you. 2, that the committee recommends that council exempt under Section 7 of the Local Government Act 2002 Rotorua District Council Holdings Limited from its reporting and audit requirements. 3, that the committee recommends to council that no financial statements be prepared for RDC Holdings Limited while the exemption applies, and 4, that the committee recommends to council that the exemption identified in point 2 of this recommendation extend for a period of 3 years commencing for the 2018-2019 financial year or until RDC Holdings Limited begins trading. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now we're going to go to the presentation on the Lakefront Reserve. And I think Portia's going to be presenting that this morning in place of JP. And we do have a number of guests to come up this morning. And I know Portia will introduce them all. But on behalf of the Mayor and Councillors, welcome to you all this morning, and we're certainly looking forward to this presentation. Good morning, Portia. Thank you.
Kia ora, Morena. I'm Bob Harvey, and I've had the honour of chairing the working group. I'd like to acknowledge you, Mayor. Thank you. Thank you very much for putting faith in this group. And councillors, I can only say it is a group, extraordinary group, that has been able to work together very, very carefully, I think. And we've made progress of, I think, astonishingly clear vision for Rotorua and the lakefront. I think the lakefront is one of the iconic images, if you like, of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And you should be enormously proud of what it is. And it's basically survived, almost intact, which is quite unusual in most towns and cities that have managed to muck up a lot of the best things they've ever had over decades of bad planning and misuse. Somehow you've been lucky, because I think you've valued the lake through all its challenges and tribulations over the years. The beautiful lake, the sight lines to Mokoia and beyond is there. And so I think that we have seen that it's so important to preserve what you have, the natural beauty of Rotorua, and indeed some of those early plans which took the vision to the lake, and it's a destination second to none. Our job has basically been to enhance that for future generations, to not really muck around with it, to take great design, beautiful design, if you like, for the future, and lay it very gently on the lakefront. And so this morning, we're going to show you something that we feel enormously proud of. A fantastic design that I think will work for not only this generation, but for future generations. It's design work from a group of, I think, extraordinarily good people. At the heart of it is our working relationship. And I think that is so important, that you can feel assured that there is a group of people, and I'd like to just acknowledge them, that have come together with a common kaupapa to actually do something that's worthy of you, of elected members and the council, that kind of responsibility that we have felt that is what you've asked us to do, and that's what you've empowered us to do. So Portia, of course, from council is the glue, really. She puts us all together. David Irwin from Ishmael is here. He'll talk, so will Carl Johnson, the cultural designer. But I would like to acknowledge the importance of the relationship with Māori, with iwi. And our dear friend Malcolm is here, Alec is here, and Terry. Kia ora. To me, it's, if you talk of what we are as New Zealanders and who we are working together, the partnership has got to unfold, if you like, visions, ideas, and dreams. And this is one of those visions and dreams of Rotorua, to see something here that you can be proud of. And the way that tourism is going in Aotearoa, you are the prime site in the North Island. And that's so important to me. So there's a lot of other things that we've been talking about, rail links, investment, both local and international. So we've been aware of the backstory, if you like, and soon I hope it will be the front story on what you expect from us to do. So I'm delighted to tell you and report that the steering group has come together. They're working really well. There's good debate. There's good dialogue. So we are taking those decisions in the best possible way forward for local government, of which is the very heart of this presentation. So Portia, if you could lead us through I nearly said the minefield, but I think it isn't one of those. It's a joy to do this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Morena, I'm just going to give you a bit of an update as to where we're at over the last couple of months and where we've got to in terms of some of that detail. So what I'd like to just show you is a couple of really good national examples of other provincial cities around the country and where they're getting to with their waterfronts. Quite streaming quite far ahead of us.
Just move the, thank you,
sorry.
just so that, because we are streaming live and it's good for everyone to hear.
Sorry.
Thank you.
So Napier is a really good example of some of the work that they've done over the last couple of years, building on some of their historic gardens down on the Marine Parade. Their work is continuing down to the National Aquarium. Really good example of they're putting in about 5 million per annum down at the Marine Parade. Whangarei Town Basin, so also a lot of work done down there in the recent years around the canopies, the art and trail walk, and moving their museum down to this edge as well. Gisborne Riverside City Walk, and also their oceanfront cycleway and pathway. Really good example of a low investment, but also hugely successful for them, and they're continuing their works as well. New Plymouth Boardwalk, hugely popular as well. Quite a significant investment for New Plymouth to put in, but it's really paid off for them. Tauranga, our neighbours, also doing a lot of work up there on the Strand, and they've got some plans down there to extend that as well. So they've put in their new playground and their steps, very successful with all their residents as well. So I think these examples are really good examples of similar sized cities to us with waterfronts and the work that they're doing to take their cities forward in terms of the amenity and the aesthetics of their waterfront and how much they value those spaces. So I'm just going to take you on a bit of a journey on what our lakefront looks like at the moment in comparison. So yeah, a little investment has gone in here in the last 10 years, purely because we've had a plan for a long time, which we've been struggling to implement. Really is starting to get tired and dated and in need of that investment. Some underground fuel tanks that are down there. This is the beach on the other side of the Scout Den, and this is a bit of a wider view of the boat ramp there. The Scout Den itself is fairly industrial looking in design, and it sits on a really important headland on the lakefront as well. The Scouts have relocated, so it's empty now, but also the Sound Shell and the Lakeside Cafe are other empty buildings that are sitting on our lakefront. Just reminding you of where the lakefront fits into our vision. So really important for our city heart, our objectives around that, meeting those key strengths and opportunities and goals. The lakefront's also a project that's listed in the spatial plan, one of those really important projects to be undertaken for that ring of reserves. And again, the lakefront's in our long-term plan, and that funding's been allocated as well. You'll also remember Terry Stevens, who visited a couple of years ago. He made this recommendation around the lakefront and how important it is for the health of our city. And really what we're doing over the last few months is acting on that recommendation and acting on that vision that you've put in place. And really just starting to move this lakefront forward into our future and match up against all those other cities that are streaming ahead of us. We have regional support as well for this project. So this project, as well as our forest project, has been identified as the top 2 priorities in the Bay of Plenty for our visitor economy. So really important that we take this forward, not just for us, but for the region. And then, of course, really critical to this and underpins the whole project is our partner support, who we have here today with us. So really important that they sit on our advisory group and make sure that we're moving forward together. So just an update around what's been happening over the last couple of months since the long-term plan decision was made. Our steering group is meeting regularly. The steering group has also divided up into a number of work streams, depending on everyone's skills and experience. You'll remember the Provincial Growth Fund that was granted to us in June, so that funding was really critical for us to take this project forward. And what it enabled us to do was to actually go out and get some of the best consultants in the country to make sure that we're pitching our lakefront to the best, you know, to the best quality standards and design. So those consultants we've got Isthmus with us here today. So huge background around designing Auckland waterfront and Wellington waterfront in New Plymouth. We also have Carl Johnston here for around the cultural design. Huge skills and experience that Carl's bringing to the table. We have Tonkin and Taylor working on civil and geotechnical engineering, We have Veros project managing and working on the feasibility of the main building down on the site. We've also been out talking with all our stakeholders as well, which are really important. So there's been a number of meetings down at Ohinimutu. We've been meeting with our lakefront operators, city developers. We've been meeting with boards, iwi boards, and giving regular updates. Our Provincial Growth Fund application for the match funding was submitted last week, and that is with them for consideration for that match fund of nearly 20 million to match our long-term plan. And last week or the week before, Ngāti Whakaui Gifted Reserves Protocol Committee met, and they support the amendments to the Reserve Management Plan, and that's an item on your agenda coming up. So that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Carl. He's going to take you through some of the design to give you a bit of some of that detail.
Thank you, councillors. I'll take questions later. I think we'll move through the presentation and we'll take questions just in case there's some overlap there. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning.
O aku rangatira, tēnā koutou katoa, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou. Te arawa waka, te arawa tangata, tēnā koutou, mō koutou tautoko o tēnei kaupapa, ki a koutou hoki te kaunihira o te arawa, tēnā koutou. For the purposes of brevity, I'm going to introduce the concept at a high level. And within that, just explain that this is the first part of the development process. So this leads into a fuller development and detailed design process, but it should hopefully give you a strong flavour in where this is heading. When we started to assess the opportunity and began our engagement, it became very apparent that one of the greatest things was how this lakefront or waterfront met with the rest of the development in and around Rotorua. And what became obvious very quickly was there was a conversation about duality, there was a conversation about balance, and there was a conversation about adjacencies. Whether you look at it in terms of the meeting of water and land, or whether you look at it in terms of the diasporic history of Te Arawa, looking out to Makoia and one of its old names, Te Motu-Tapua Tiniro, and that link to the Pacific, or whether you looked at it in the context of the Fenton Agreement and the development of the town plan and Fenton Street, there was this conversation that was happening in a very natural way about adjacencies. And so for us, we took that as the cue to do something which we believe, or we are aspiring to make incredibly sophisticated. And the reason that we've taken that position is that we believe that wherever you look in the world, there's an opportunity to present Māori narratives, and Māori narratives and their connection not only to the past, but to those places and how they've informed and shaped knowledge and worldview. And we believe that to fall into a constructed narrative that simply perpetuates things that Rotorua already does well would be a mistake, but to actually look back and pull out the simplicity, and within that simplicity actually lies the complexity. So one of the first things we did was to look at the form, and with Isthmus taking very much a lead on that, and looking at the natural scalloping of the lake. So rather than trying to construct something that in many ways imposed itself on the lake, we were trying to think about how did we construct something that paralleled what was already there. And then within that, how did we think about those, ngā tapawai o ngā tipuna, the footprints of our ancestors and how they observed and how they found knowledge within the environment. And so for us, those adjacencies were about the past as much as they were about moving forward. So we started to map the old shoreline. We started to think about issues where balance was required, issues of environmental sustainability against development, issues of acknowledging and enhancing the role of mana whenua in storytelling and in the sharing of those narratives against the developments and the broader development story. The balance or the duality that laid in inviting manuhiri into the space, visitors from around the world, but how did we also honour and how did we actually service and develop cultural and social equity within our own people here in Rotorua? And so for us, that became a real driver. How did we create an opportunity for development that built social capital? And so the design itself is based on the lake, based on those view shafts and those things that you see when standing on that foreshore. And it's about reconnection. One of the things we mapped was the old land blocks. And so if there's an example, Kaurama Whitiwhiti, obviously it shows the transitory nature of the Kaura moving up and down the shoreline. Also a place where waka were frequently moored. So starting to develop those narratives to think about what was happening under the water as much as what was happening on top, and how that boardwalk actually became a way of acknowledging the line between the balance points. When we started thinking about the construction and how we started to address the physical manifestation of this development, we couldn't move past the waka that's currently down there. And to think that actually one of the most simple things that needs to happen is that needs to be repositioned so that we honour that canoe, and that we honour it in a way that talks about, once again, our migratory histories, our connection to the Pacific, our connection to the water, and therefore, ironically, our connection to the land, because waka, in their essence, are the children of Tāne. So they come from the land, and on the ocean, all of the incantations that are performed are about acknowledging Tāne. They're less about acknowledging Tangaro. So we wanted to position the waka in a way that created a hierarchy of physical or structured elements, and then start to unbundle those elements through the rest of the design. So one thing that you always or often have with a whare waka or a waka house is a ramp, and the name of the ramp is typically Te Ara Tukutuku. And it's again about binding. It's about the pathway for binding water and land. And so the forms that you see, which are the pathways onto the boardwalk, take that notion and then start to rethink how the water and the land are stitched together, how the whole narrative, the whole concept is stitched together. There will be a lot of detailing that take elements of the waka and start to think about, maybe the way we join to the land and water. So, for example, on a waka, when you lash the rauawa, the side strakes to the hull, you use caulking, which is typically made of pinaki, and we'll take those design features and start to use those elements all the way through the development of the design. One of the other principal things that the moving of the waka does is it becomes a place for connection, a place for the drop-off of visitors, a place for gathering, whether it's those gathering to move on to tama, into Ohinemutu, or further down into the lakeside itself. Obviously, something very, very simple happens, and to date, the conversations that we've had is in and around the Te Arawa waka is that, it's held up by the 8 ngā pūmanawe waru, the 8 po of Te Arawa. And again, making an adjacency between there and future opportunities that Ohinemutu may have. And obviously within that you have Tamata Kapua, the whare parimata, and you have Te Arawa waka. So Te Arawa waka, Te Arawa tangata becomes a central statement in the development of this area. The opportunity to then, for Ohinemutu, as they identify the opportunities, is to think of the waka as a pivot point between Ohinemutu and those things or those opportunities that the village sees in the development, but also as a pivot point to the lakefront itself. So at a high level, that's where the concept sits. As I say, a lot more engagement needed in the detail and development. At a conceptual level, it's providing a robust framework. It's a robust framework that talks about the value proposition that's intrinsic within Te Arawa, but nonetheless, I think celebrates both the past and also the future. So kia ora koutou, I'm going to pass on to David.
Thank you. Good morning.
Kia ora,
David.
Morena. As Carl's explained, my job's to try and now explain in a little bit more depth quickly what are the sort of features that we're seeing on the plan. So we sort of explain it in design terms as in 3 parts, 3 moves really. One, build a boardwalk, and the boardwalk, as Carl explained, is in relation to the edge, the coastal edge, and in that giant scallop field. Well, the boardwalk's 600 metres long, 5 metres wide. It's of significant size. it's that because it feels that the scale of that we need to work in needs to fit with the true scale of what the city is, and I think it fits. I think the idea is that it sort of fits comfortably in there. One of the things, I suppose, even with the images that Portia puts up, I mean, I sort of I see it slightly differently, because I think the benchmark that we're playing with here is actually not a regional benchmark, it's actually an international benchmark. And that is the scale, that's what we're aiming for. And we've got to make sure we don't fall below that, because it is such a special place. For me, I'm a visitor. I see it every time I come. Every time you get hit by the lake, you get hit by the mist, you get hit by the steam, the island, all the things that Sir Bob was talking about. I mean, there is mud that boils. This is a special place. This needs to reflect that in it. So the scale is the scale that we're designing at is the scale that the city sort of reflects the city's scale. So it's 600 metres long, it's 5 metres wide, it goes over partly over water, it sticks out onto the end. We've got a little pointer. Yeah, comes out over the top here with a sort of glimpse views back, comes through here with a more subtle edge back through here, and it's connected by what we call move number 2, which are these tukutuku bridges, which Carl was explaining. They're sort of stitched back to the land. And move number 3, which is actually, oops, crikey, wrong way, sorry guys. What happened there? Thanks, sorry. The working on the actual edge of the water itself.
We'll just get that up for you again.
Yeah, I think that was my fault. I had the wrong button. Cool, thanks. Careful with the finger here. The idea of the actual edge itself, so these sort of reflecting the edge, and there's a variety of conditions. So this being an edge where you can actually get down to the water, this allows the boardwalk to go across both. The headland itself, so making sure that headland's got some real strength to it, and the sort of commercial opportunities that can happen across this piece of wharf structure, and then relieving this piece here of the sort of the scout hall and the things that are sitting on the top of here, and making sure we've got this link to the commercial opportunities that are here. There's great opportunity here in the relation to how we've actually pulled the car parking back to the sides, which allows us to have more space here for market, for bringing open the opening up of the view shaft through to the whare waka, which is sitting here. Opportunity for a commercial entity, in this instance here, which has got a relationship, so it can look out over the water, it's got a strong relationship to the whakiwara, the whare waka, and also for what's happening on the boardwalk. Perhaps out here you could actually, leap off. Perhaps there's bombs off the end of this. There's been some quite interesting people talking about that sort of thing. Great for the locals. The idea of a waka armour building, so this allows space and water activities all to be brought back through here. And opportunity for disabled parking and the like at the end and through here, which is close access to the water, and all of this can be accessed from a disability onto the boardwalk itself, so you can get right out onto the water itself.
David, thank you. I wonder if you could now take
Sure.
your pointer and point onto that one there. Thank you.
Sure.
And just repeat it, thank you, because there are people in the gallery who wouldn't have been
Can't
able
see
to
that
see
one.
it on that
Sure.
one. So if you don't mind, thank you, because
No
it is
problem.
interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, right-handed, left-handed, yeah. Okay, so the key moves is the boardwalk going through here, 600 metres long, 5 metres wide, and that fitting into the bay form we talked about. The tukutuku bridges that Carl was talking about, which stitch back into the coastal edge. The idea of having a light line of coastal edge, but allows water on both sides of this, close to the town, close to the CBD. Re-establishing the strength of this headland while relieving this headland of the building that's on it, making sure that we've got good connection here to the potential commercial activities that happen through here. Positioning the whare waka over here, so as Carl had explained, which is sitting inside the view shaft that comes through here, so it just impinges on it, which allows this to get direct access through to this piece of water. The idea of creating a waka ama or a building that allow a waka ama storage or a waka ama place to allow us to bring the boating activities together and the entranceway, re-establishing or positioning an entranceway to Ahinimutu. A commercial building sitting in here, which would allow to have both the sort of ticketing and those sort of things for the commercial activities sitting out here on the wharf, and a restaurant or series of restaurants or commercial activities that would sit there. We pulled the parking to the sides, which allows us to free this all up to allow this connection through here, and a toilet block here so that we've got buses coming in. First thing you can do is use the facilities if you need them, and then be able to spend time exploring the area. And the playground sitting inside through here gets a significant upgrade and change of focus. The market area, it gets a combination of both harder spaces and grass spaces to allow that to be explored and to be able to be expanded, and still stays as a key focus for the area. I think for the moment that's the key stuff.
So just in terms of next steps, you've got a paper in front of you today to make a decision around the consultation on the reserve management plan. What we're also going to continue to do is we're going to refine these concepts that you see today. It's really important to remember that we are still at a concept design stage. We still have a lot of conversations to happen with operators and other developers in the area to make sure that this design is taken forward and works for everyone. So what you've seen today may change over the next few months, but we'll be keeping you on that journey and bringing back designs as we update them along the way. So one stage that we're looking to do, what the Provincial Growth Fund has funded us to complete, is this detailed design of stage 1, and that's the area outside of the new spa development that is currently underway. We're also going to define a commercial process, and we will be bringing that back to you as well around that commercial building on the site. And we're going to move forward into preparing an implementation plan, which is of course subject to our Provincial Growth Fund application as well. So that's our next steps. I'm just going to hand you back to Sir Bob to close up.
Thank you, Portia. Mayor, councillors, Madam Chair, when we saw that design, we felt we were absolutely so pleased about the way it flowed, that it was an international design, and it's also a national tribute, I think, to Rotorua and the Lakefront. Portia showed you what other towns and cities are doing. So you're not alone at being brave and doing something. When I looked at the images of down there, even on a good day, it wasn't looking what I'd call flash. It seemed to me that it's not before time you sat together, the community, the council, all the stakeholders, and said, we need to do something that looks a little better than this. The people that visit Rotorua, as well as the locals, which I think are hugely important to you and to us, need something that they can feel so good and proud about. We felt good about that design. I thought the sweep of the boardwalk, the walkway, was just a stroke, I would like to say, of genius, to take it sweeping like a canoe of a waka out into the lake. So people, yes, can jump off if they want to. And a lot of people do seem to want to jump off in the water these days. The way that we've moved the whariwaka to somewhere that feels comfortable and right. And also, we are mindful that Ahinimutu is one of the iconic, I think, destinations in this country. The same way that we feel that the sight lines are important to keep, and the lake and its beauty is so important. So these are the elements, and I think that we now need to talk through those elements, and that's what the whole steering group really is about, is to bring it together, to debate it, and then give it to the future. through the arms of yourself as councillors, custodians of good ideas, well delivered, I think, by this council and by this place. Look, we'd be delighted to take some questions if there's any. Mayor and Chair, if you have any.
Thank you, Sir Bob, and thank you to the steering group for the work that you've done so far. I'd like to ask our Mayor to make the first comments for the presentation.
Well, thank you, Sir Bob, and your team for, I like you saying, bringing it through the arms of Council. And we're all very aware of the many iterations that have happened in the past. And I will ask you to clarify that some of that thinking, has that been incorporated, or is this an entirely new approach? But also you talked about the investment and the valuing of the lake and the lake and the land. I think you're right, since we're cleaning the lake and investing in that, we do now really value the preciousness of our waters. And this is the next stage of investment, so it goes both ways, land and water, but also I'm glad to hear you say about stage one, because I always worry a little bit about the primacy and the importance of the place of Ohinimutu as the village, as the town began at Ohinimutu, and how do we incorporate that into here, and how does that integration happen in other stages, and have we accounted for that? And also you mentioned the relationship, Carl, with our Maunga, and for us as well, Tarawera is incredibly important. So those view shafts of Nongataha, Tarawera and Makoia, and our beautiful museum. So I just can see it even wider. I'm not trying to go so big, but it does really go from that view shaft to this view shaft and Makoia, and I'm so glad you've captured those elements. Is this a stage 2 or stage 3? But it is very inspiring, and I think you've gone absolutely the right way to look at the elements that we must preserve, and the planning then happens around those elements. I'm much happier than a cobbled together set of, we'll put a bit of this here and a bit of that and a bit of commercial here and water sports there. That I'm very relieved at the approach. My major question, because I am comforted by your leadership, but my major question is, we're also aware of climate change, and you showed us the waterfront, and it certainly is tired. But we are seeing such a lot of degradation with weather events. And so I hope the boardwalk concept can go up. It's more a wharf, because we do see quite dramatic rises in water now, and it would be ghastly if we're constantly repairing a boardwalk that's underwater. That it would be underwhelming. So has that been considered in that, without it impeding on the view lines?
I think I can help answer that one. We're working very closely with Tonkin & Taylor. Tonkin & Taylor are the experts, and we work with them on coastal edges all over the place. They are the experts in that question, but on their behalf, they've set a height that we must the boardwalk must be, which is higher than the current edge at the moment. So it's about 600 high, whereas at the moment it's about 300 high, and that takes into account climate change. It also takes into account the wave climate. So the wave action coming down from the northerly, which we understand is the one that causes the most grief, and also means of how we design the boardwalk for the pieces that are completely over water. That's actually a significant structure, and it's actually got big piles. It's actually a bigger thing than I suppose we even imagined when we first did it. On the edge itself, and that's mainly because there's a very deep amount of base before they hit anything solid. So which is a typical Rotorua condition in that area. Where it's on the land, it's a different thing, and it can be built in a different way, but look the same.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora koutou katoa. Thank you to the public also that are here. It's wonderful to see. We already have the most photographed building in New Zealand, our museum, and by these interesting and very exciting plans, we could potentially have the most photographed boardwalk. Who knows?
Yeah.
Thank you so much, actually, for explaining the meaning behind the Kaura ma whiti whiti, actually, because when that wording came up in here, I wondered there must be a story to it, and the story of it is Kaura, being the Māori, the small crayfish, ma being clear, the water was so crystal clear when we first arrived, and whiti whiti, the tracks of the Kaura. And I think those are the kind of stories that we need to be talking about. I actually couldn't help myself. I went through Don Stafford's Landmarks of Te Aroha and looked at the original site of the lakefront there. So I'm very pleased to see that you'll be incorporating that into it. But I can't help but think with this that, well, even with the name and the stories that we're going to tell, what is going to be the story in another 100 years? We've only been here 300 years. And so while it's all good and exciting to put things in place, how are we ensuring that the environment that's always been there is going to be preserved and maintained? So my questions this morning are two areas, one on the environment and one on commercial. So the Reserves Act 1977 is designed to provide for and assure the use, enjoyment, maintenance, protection and preservation. So my question is just because I do see it as missing, because there are only environmental aspects in here currently, just talk about what sort of trees we're going to plant. And I think that we could go much further, also looking at biosecurity as well with the issue, that potential issue that we may have with catfish, and just how are we ensuring that we have a boardwalk, but what's under the boardwalk is going to be maintained. So I'm not sure if in our other reserve management plans we have such a focus on the environment, but I would like to see that come through. So just a question on, is that being thought about? And the second question is on the commercial aspects. So on page 20 in our first attachment, when we look at the leases and concessions, as part of it says the long-term lease. And there's long-term leases that will be applied. My question is just how long will these long-term leases be applied? Because we do have other situations in Rotorua on a reserve where we have a long-term lease that's in perpetuity, that no longer enables the public use and enjoyment. And so I'm just wanting to be careful of what we wish for. So how long will the long-term lease be there? And I can't go past this very small but important point of overnight camping that's also on here on page 20. And it states overnight camping will be permitted in designated car parks only in accordance with all policies and bylaws. I'm surprised that's actually in there, because there's been a strong push from our community, from our local businesses, and also from Ohinemutu. Only 2 weeks ago we had the workshop in Ohinemutu, and I found it quite clear that they did not want overnight camping in the lakefront. So just looking at that as well, is does overnight camping have to be in there, or should it not be in there from the push that we've had from the community? So I apologise, I know that's lots, but just the two questions on the environment and also the commercial. Thank you.
Can I just say thank you very much, Councillor Tapsell, and it may not be possible for the steering committee to answer all of your questions in depth, but at least I'm sure they will be noted. But please, thank you, Sir Bob.
Tapsell, I think those questions you ask are valid, and I think that we are very conscious of all of those issues. As I said, we are meeting regularly, and we find ourselves asking those questions also. What I feel so proud about is this place is a story in itself. It's a place of legends, it's a place of history, it's a place of generations of Māori and new tourism coming in from the last century, second to none. This was the place. And so if you read, as you're reading the history of this place, we have to be mindful of what our responsibility is. I think, I'm making a bit of a guess here, that it is to go gentle on this place. The last thing I would like to think, and I'm leaping ahead and I don't want to cut across anyone, is thinking of we've got to have an iconic building here. You know, this seems to me a place of not iconic buildings, but buildings that fit gently onto the lakefront. That the iconic thing is the lake, is nature. And if I just would like to pass over to the team to talk about nature, it's gone crazy. It really is terrifying. From the climate meeting that I went to in Paris, 2 years ago, all those crazy kind of people I listened to were more than accurate at the way this planet is behaving. And I think if you just think of the earthquakes in the last week, if you think that this country is not going to be part of drastic climate problems, we have to think again. I think it's terrifying. The rocks on Takapuna Beach, all of those huge rocks, didn't come from Rangitoto. They came from Lake Taupo. So we live on a very thin crust. It's not worth thinking about while we're doing this, but I think it's something we have to be mindful of. It's dangerous times on this planet right now.
Thank you. I'd wonder if you, I do have councillors who would, and quite a number of councillors who would like to speak to, ask some questions. So if you do have some further comments, I'd ask you to keep them brief, please, so that councillors have an opportunity. Thank you, David.
Just to answer a couple of the questions relating to the ecology type. So we're still working on that, but a couple of things that we could let you know about. One, underneath the boardwalk, we're thinking that could be Kura habitat. So we could actually build that, and that would be really cool if we could pull that idea off. And that was the pathway of Kura in the past. That is the idea that they walk around the edges just off the foreshore. So, and it would provide the shade. So we're researching that one at the moment. Also, the stormwater, all the hard services would go through a stormwater cleaning process to make sure that any water that we've got that we've built into that area does mean that the water going into the lake from, say, the car park runoffs is actually treated. So that's another, and also there's further work going on the ecology of the actual plant species and the biodiversity of that, which we haven't looked at yet, but in the future. Yep.
Thank you. Councillors, could you keep your comments, your questions succinct, please, because there are many of you that want to ask a question. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, my question is for Sir Bob. Last week, the Minister in charge of the Pūtea, that is the PGF, spoke here, and he addressed a number of the projects emanating from the Bay of Plenty Rohi, and a number of the people in this room were present. And he spoke specifically about the lakefront and about his time, his timeline, and he said politically, I'm looking for projects that will deliver, and I've only got 2 years. So he said, the Rotorua lakefront, I need to be convinced of pace and quality. Now, I'm reassured about quality, but already the questions and the history of previous lakefront projects being killed off through getting bogged down in detail sort of concern me about whether we can deliver in regards to pace with this project. So, Sir Bob, calling on your formidable experience in championing such projects, do you think, given the goodwill and the collaborative relationships that are forming around this project, we can deliver on pace with this project?
Deputy Mayor, yes, I do. I can actually vouch for the. I don't know about the Pūtea, but I do know about this project. I think this is an inspirational project, and you've got to start with an inspirational project that looks really right. You know, I mean, they say in local government, it's wrong to be right too soon. This seems to me to be a project that is absolutely right. It's, to be honest, overdue. So there's an excitement here because this is who you work for, and I think that this can be inspirational. And as for our pace, I think it's absolutely spot on. We've got a lot of questions which we'll continue answer. Thank you, Madam Chair. Would anybody like to pick that up from here?
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
I'm delighted with the presentation, and thank you, Sir Bob, for being here to go through the different concepts. You mentioned that the concepts, to me, that as illustrated today, are uniquely Te Arawa, and that's where we want it to be. I just wondered, one of the areas that I don't want to miss the boat on, and I think this is what Councillor Donaldson was driving at before, is because we haven't properly consulted with iwi. We hadn't had the Te Arawa relationship that we now have, and I just want to make sure that you see this as a critical part of this process, because the interpretation Te Arawa, and you picked up obviously some of those themes, in particular with the waka, etc., are uniquely Rotorua and uniquely Te Arawa, so I just don't want you to lose that opportunity. I just wondered what was going to happen to the existing volcanic playground. Are the tuki bridges suspended, or are they just flat boardwalks? Because I think that would have an element, picking up on what her worship said, not only taking in Tarawera, Noataa, Mokoia, but Tupuia to the south with the steam coming off the cliffs as well. I just wondered, a question maybe for you, Portia, what is the status and where is the involvement of the golf course in this concept plan? Because I think that is also critical, whether that's stage 3, 4 or 5, I don't know. As a lead for sport and recreation, I'm absolutely delighted you found a home for waka ama. Seeing those waka ama strewn around our streets, safely strewn, not dangerously, but stored on our streets in Parawai Road and Noataa and out at the lakes, etc., to actually find a home for waka ama is a delight for me. The other question is, I agree with Councillor, and I hope you agree, that overnight camping is not compatible with this project. But the other thing is the trip, and this is where you come in, Portia, down by the Scout Hall is the major inlet into the lake of stormwater. That is not treated properly, in my view. It goes over a set of grills. I don't think it is treated properly, and I think within your plan, we need to come up with something to cater for that as well. Otherwise, we're just going to keep pouring the stormwater into Lake Rotorua, and I think denigrating what the boardwalk, what the tuki bridges, etc., are trying to create. So there's a number of questions there, Madam Chair.
I would remind councillors that this is this was a concept presentation today. This is the first of many, so we'll have ample opportunity as the months go by to hear back and to put more perhaps in-depth, detailed questions. So this is the concept today. So thank you. Thank you, Portia.
Yeah, so just on your question about the playground, the volcanic playground, we're exploring some options about repurposing that into other playgrounds. Then just the question around the golf course. Because we're focusing quite heavily at the moment on where we're at right now and what we can achieve in a short time frame as what the Provincial Growth Fund is looking for us to do. We're focusing on the site outside the spa and all the way to a Hunimutu for now, but that's definitely can be some later stages. The other important thing is that through the lakefront goes the cycleway that loops our city together. So up and around Sulphur Point, around past the museum, out to, past Sanatorium Reserve, to the forest, to Waka, to the Tupuia, and back up into the city. So a hugely important loop, of which the lakefront is part of that, one piece of that, the loop that takes up all the unique features of Rotorua City. So, and the stormwater, we're working with Tonkin and Taylor on that, and we'll come back to you with some more detail once we've refined it further.
I think the iwi engagement, I think Sir Bob did mention that right at the start, the importance of that.
It's total and absolute.
Yes.
And I think that's been the missing ingredient, maybe in the past, but it's very much focused as part of our tying together this project.
Ms Mohi, thank you.
Tēnā koutou. Nā mihi kia koutou nā mana whenua, he harumai ki te whakarongo kia tautoko, kia whakawhitiwhiti o whakaro ki tēnei kaupapa. Nā mihi kia koutou. Thank you for that presentation. It was nice to see that concept, the initial concept plan that you've provided. Loving the waka flow through that. And I suppose I've got sort of two sets of questions, so I'll just break them into the concept plan and then the reserve plan issues. So just straight off here, awesome kaupapa kōrero.
Gina, I'd like you to leave the reserve plan points to the second, thank you, presentation. Thank you.
So just wanted to, he waka taua, tēnei te arawa waka. Just wondering whether there was some whakaaro around building and concepts of wakahaurua, being the ones that we actually got here on, and also reminding ourselves of the practice of the use of waka kōpapa on the lakes and how they still practice that in Tainui. You know, the racing that used to happen, the, jumping over those crossbars, just those conversations being had with Ngāti Whakaue. The other one was being mindful too of the role McCoy Island plays and the trust a part of this process, but particularly another thing that Te Aroha commonly did before roads came about, the road was the lake. And when the city or the township was first being established, there was a neat little connection that was going on between Whakaue, Ngāti Rangiwewehi, and even over to the east side, Rangi Te Aorere way. And so it's a discussion that we've had through our treaty processes, was the establishment of those internal water roads, so to speak. Within your concept planning is maybe just being cognizant of future connections back to Mokoia, back to Rangi, back to Hamurana. And so that, going off your climate change kōrero, that we're supporting the movement away from carbon-based boats and fuels and moving towards sort of electric motors, and therefore having those charging stations available like you'd get on the marinas, so you can just plug in, charge up and move our people around the lake. We have a lot of congestion problems on our roads as we want to grow our city. How do we deal with that? This could be something that just sits in the background, so that when people are, organisations, iwi, whoever are capable of then, dovetailing into this, they can. What's the other one?
Thank you. I am going to ask councillors to move it along, please. I have 7 speakers that are yet to speak, and I will be closing this discussion off at 11 o'clock. So be mindful that you've got your other fellow councillors that would like to pose a question. Thank you.
So my last point really is just that to ensure that the haukuanga are actually really seen in this. I just saw a few faces screw up, actually, when I saw some of the comments that were said, so that sends me a message that perhaps it's not quite as what we're hearing. So that's all I want to say. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora. I'll try and be brief. So, point number 1, in terms of wakahaurua, kōpapa taurua, etc., yes, we do think that in the existing the design whare, there's facility certainly for kōpapa, but we see it as a whole rearticulation or revitalisation of engagement with waka and the lake, and the kōpapa being certainly central to that. In terms of the iwi engagement conversation, you never get there, but certainly work in progress. The door is wide open, and we know that we've still got work to do to continue to reach out and get to everybody. That's going to take time. But in what is a truncated process, we've made the right advances, and certainly it's not an exclusive process. It needs to be inclusive, and we'll ensure that it is the whole way through. Kia ora.
Thank you. Mr. Berryman Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and more Lena Koto, thank you for a impressive and inspiring presentation. I have 3 questions, but just to double check through you, Madam Chair, one of my specific questions is regarding the composition of the hearing panel. Did you want to have that discussion now or later?
No, later, thank you.
Kapai, thank you. Sorry.
That's in the next one, thank you.
Put that out later then. Really then, I guess, actually, probably the key thing then is just to outline, yes, certainly pleased to see one of my concerns was, and some of the original pictures were relatively generic, whereas I think the design that you've brought out is uniquely Rotorua, which is what we aim for. Certainly tautoko, the incorporation of the waka as well. My question, which is great, and certainly from some of the groups that I'm involved with, will certainly meet some needs. What is the potential of the boardwalk in terms of actually staging wakaama and canoe races at the lakefront?
High, because we've got we've got the ability to be able to put some pieces on the side of it, which we're looking at right at the moment, back in the studio. We're incorporating into it that lower it down so that they're at water level. So those bits would be off to the side, and from there you could make sure you can launch and get in and out of Waka onto the boardwalk. So it should be able to do that sort of thing.
And thank you. And just to you, Madam Chair, the rationale behind that, totally get the cultural and the design elements, get that too. But obviously the potential for that in terms of Wakaama sport is for the venue to be a centre for hosting races. And Wakaama, I think, is the 4th largest sport in the Bay of Plenty in terms of rangatahi engagement. So there's strong economic rationale behind that too. Be fantastic to have a facility that can facilitate that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Berman-Kemp. Councillor Maxwell, then Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora, Sir Bob and the team for taking the presentation. I won't be asking a lot of questions because fortunately I sat with the Ngāti Whakaue Gifted Reserves meeting, and the presentation that was done there helped me with a lot of questions I had, but the presentation this morning took it a step further. So I do have one important question, but no, thank you. The one I have is, Carl, on the lovely explanation you gave regarding the whare waka and the te arawa waka. I think that's a tremendous move to move from where it is positioned at the moment, not being seen as much, where it's going to go. Can you just elaborate briefly just how much more the te arawa waka is going to become part of the activities on the lakefront?
Sure. First and foremost, it's obviously the symbolism and to honour the waka in the way that it's displayed. So it'll be raised on a plinth. We've consulted around the tikanga, given it's a waka taua, so it will have a transparent sort of, I don't want to say barriers, but it'll have a mechanism, a design mechanism that stops people from directly engaging with it. But there's room in and around the waka for the housing of kōpapa and other canoes as well. So looking from Eat Street on that view shaft towards Makoia, you'll either see the silhouette of the waka, depending on the light, or the waka itself, but also at night, a lighting of it. So looking to shift and change the way that it's currently stored and protected, and to having something that's a little bit more design sensitive so that it can actually be celebrated in its full. In terms of its use, I mean, that will sit with the Te Arawa Waka Trust, but certainly what we're looking to do is create access on the inside part of the boardwalk, which will have the level of depth required. It's a deeper part, obviously, of the lake, where people can actually get on from the boardwalk end, as well as from land. So just trying to create a little, I guess, an ease of access for the waka to the lake as it's looking to be enjoyed.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and as per your request, I will be brief. Sir Bob, I congratulate you and your committee. What I'm seeing, I'm quite excited and in fact quite relieved to actually see something that is way beyond what was discussed in terms of the workshops that we had. I think you're definitely on the right track. My questions are, one, have you considered the potential if you've got like a funnel heading, facing north into the prevailing wind, what is the potential and how are you going to cater for all the weed that's going to accumulate there? Because it could become a rather smelly mess. And secondly, do you have a feel for cost and time frame? Thank you.
With the weeds, but I certainly can say that you'll be very made aware of all costings as we start bringing it together, sir. I think it's a good question. And also, back to climate, I think we need some expertise on exactly what you're talking about with weed and indeed climate. And the costings, I think that you'll find us absolutely committed to you with those costings. We will budget financially securely, because we are aware of local government and the issues around blowouts. If you know that word, I think we do. Would anyone else like to pick up the weeds?
There's certainly
Literally.
There's certainly different definitions of the word weed. Not West Coast weed. So the topic of cleaning the lake weed is a very hot topic, and it's been brought to our attention. We don't have a magic answer to that at all, except that it's been under discussion about how it gets maintained in those big northerly events, and council officers are all over this issue as a big one. So I don't think we have a magic answer to it, except to say that it's a hot topic that we need to solve and make sure that we haven't got entrapment issues with it. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Gould, then Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Sir Bob and the team for the presentation this morning. I know our story needs to be told, but my question is to do with one of your first slides when you mentioned CAPEX submitted 1st of August of 19.9 million. Is that just for stage one? And if not, what years does it apply to the RLC's budget? And are you going to get funding from outside sources as well to reduce the cost to council?
So you'll remember in the long-term plan, you've put aside 20 million in the long-term plan with an expectation to find that match funding. So that application that we've made to that Provincial Growth Fund last week is for that match fund to make it up for that 40 million that's listed into the long-term plan. Oh, and sorry. Stage one, we're still working on the costings for stage one at the moment, so that 19.9 million isn't for stage one, it's half of the total.
Is that 19.9 million for stage one and part of stage two, or just stage one?
I think those are questions that can later come to our financial officer when we know a bit more. Thank you. We'll leave that one there at this stage. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I've just got a couple of comments or questions following on from what some other councillors have said, and I support the comments made by Councillor Tapsell around sustainability and the ongoing future of the lakefront and the plans. I think it's really important that we do look a long way out. One of the reasons for that is, although at the moment we're achieving our TLIs for Lake Rotorua, that is most probably a temporary thing, and we will struggle in coming years to keep that TLI at that level. And I think the latest scientific information coming out is pointing to climate change for us having a huge effect on the amount of nutrients we're going to have to continue to pull out of our lakes to maintain our TLIs, not to improve them. So, I think we need that look ahead into the future. I also support the Mayor's comments around the allowing for lake level changes. And you talked about 600 mil in the 2017 hurricanes that came in one on top of each other. Rotorua actually went up 1 metre. So it is a real issue for us. And I think you also mentioned you're working with Tompkin Taylor, who have an expertise around coastal areas. I think what we need to remember is that our lakes, although coastal areas the water goes up and down, it's over a 6-hour, 12-hour cycle. In our lakes, it's months and sometimes years. And once again, with the effects of climate changes, seems to be indicating we'll get more heavy rain events. So it isn't that the coastal water's rising, but that we will have our lakes flooding, and we already have that at the moment. So it is, and that water level, when Rotorua went up at 1 metre, it took 4 months to get it back down to its maximum, or supposed maximum level. So I guess, I'm hoping that you... So thank you. I hope you are working at those issues, and I guess it is a comment or a request rather than a question on that. The final thing I'd just like to say is I notice that there's the village green has been left untouched. Are you looking at developing that? I think it'd be a real shame that we have this imaginative plan for the lakefront and then we have the village green sitting there like a forgotten empty paddock that floods every time it rains. So are you looking at some concepts for the village green in the future?
Just around the village green, all of the feedback that we've received over the years from the public is to not touch the village green, that it's really important to our community. So that's why you'll see, we've done some connections to Eat Street on the edges, but keeping that there for events and other uses that it's used for by our community over time. Yeah.
Thank you. And our final two speakers, Councillor Kumar and Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll try to keep it to 60 seconds. So, fast and furious, I just will go backwards and say I understand this is a concept plan, and thank you very much for a good presentation. But my concern is for the ratepayers and citizens of Rotorua, because this will benefit Rotorua Inc. at large. There won't be admission charges and stuff. So I just hope that there's a care and maintenance program after it's built, and which is what is primarily our main concern. And the other question is whether natural reservation is going to be protected, as this is a first and probably only ever regeneration of the lakefront. If we can keep it simple to, as be in the heart of tourism, whether the tourists don't get lost in the translation. They just want the magic.
Thank you. I don't think there's any need for comment on that. Thank you for that, Councillor Kumar. Yeah, we all want the magic, locals too. Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Just, it's a really natural design. It organically sits beautifully in that place, and I love hearing the history and the story come out. I have just two small things. For the rowers, those who go out in the calm weather and need a calm area to launch their boats, may they be considered, as well as the P-class yachts down there as well. I see all of those craft on the lake, and I admire the Waka Ama because they go out in all weathers, but certainly, and we have a large body of rowers. In fact, the Waka Ama have only just overtaken them in numbers, so they're a considerable group here. The other thing is, are you aware of the work that Ian Kusabs has done on coda from the Regional Council? Because he has been mapping and measuring the increasing numbers of coda and suggests anyone goes down at the lakefront with a torch will see them exactly doing, running across and see their tracks. So he's someone to connect with for some advice. So that's all, and thank you, and I look forward to future updates.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Hunt, and thank you, councillors and committee members, for the questions that you've put this morning to Sir Bob and other members of the steering group. Thank you, Sir Bob, for the work that you have done on our behalf so far. I do think when you started, I think you are correct to say that this is overdue. When we saw the slides up there of the current lakefront, or the lakefront as it is today, it did look forlorn, actually. And I think what you've presented to us today is a concept that will stand alongside anything on the international stage. So thank you very much for the presentation this morning. Your Worship, councillors, I am going to take a 10-minute break so that we can have a cup of tea, check our messages, and then go into the recommendation 1, which is on the proposed amendments to the Lakefront Reserve. And I know there are some people here that want to listen to that as well. So we will take a 10-minute break. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Can you take your seats, please? And members of the public, if you take your seats, please. Yes. Yes, that was nice. Thank you. We've reconvened now. Thank you, councillors. I'd like to call for a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, proposed reserve management plan amendments, to the Lakefront Reserve. I'd like to move that be a mover and a seconder, please, that report be received. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried. Thank you, Henry. And you have with you...
Kia ora koutou.
Oh, Stephanie.
Yes, and I have with me Steph Kelly, who you have met before, but is our senior recreation planner.
Thank you. Good morning, Steph.
So, Madam Chair, this is really the move away from the visual and the concept into the mechanics around delivery. And again, as with the previous paper, the decision we're actually asking of you today is to send this out for public consultation, again, under the Reserves Act through the established statutory process. I suspect most of you are familiar with the purpose of reserve management plans, but essentially they're the legal documents that really reflect the provisions of the Reserves Act, the thinking of when they were developed as to how the reserve should be managed, and they set the legal framework for decision making. So what we're really wanting to do here is ensure that this existing reserve management plan, which I think was 2006, doesn't inadvertently provide blocks for potential implementation of a new concept. And I think probably the 3 or 4 messages I really want to give are, one, the decision at this stage is around the public consultation, but obviously you'll have questions about some of the mechanisms. Second is we've really tried to ensure that the values and the objectives which have been really enshrined around this place for a long time are either maintained or enhanced. So if you start at the top of the proposed changes, the suggestion around the objectives is probably a strengthening rather than anything else. So very much trying to adopt the approach of saying, look, let's get clear about the objectives and the values of this place, and then ensure that any activities that take place reflect those things. And that's probably a little bit of a move away from the philosophy which is in the current management plan, which is quite prescriptive and down to the detail of ensuring the cobbles stay the same and the furniture stays the same and various other things like this. So this is slightly more objective and values-based to say, actually, let's get that right and ensure what happens there actually reflects those things. And then I think it's probably the table on page 13, which reflects the fundamental changes. And the first one is around the building footprint, essentially, for what you would have seen on the plans, a proposed new building down on the lakefront, and this has really been envisaged for quite some time. It's actually envisaged in the current reserve management plan, and the concept is both to rationalise a bit of the clutter that's down there in terms of the almost the little shanty town of ticket offices that are on the lakefront, which were only ever envisaged as being temporary, and to move them into one space, as well as create the opportunity for restaurant, bar, cafe, or whatever other activity fits down there. So the concept in terms of the change to the management plan is not to introduce a lot more building footprints down there. It is about rationalising what we've got in terms of the number of buildings and consolidating the square meterage into one proposed place. There's also a removal of the restrictions with regard to the location of commercial activity, and again taking the approach really of saying, look, we don't know what's going to happen over the 10-year period of a reserves management plan. Let's ensure there's some flexibility about where activities are undertaken, as long as those activities are always undertaken in a way which reflects the values and the objectives for the place. Then, as I'd kind of just touched on, we've got a couple of provisions in the existing plan around locking in existing footpath style, furniture style, road layout, and various other things. So again, saying that we need more flexibility in that. You know, I don't think it's the place really of a reserves management plan to lock in things like the shape and style of furniture. And then flicking over the page, and again, it's just clarifying around the removal of the existing sound shell building and scout hall. Again, this was foreshadowed to a reasonable degree in the existing plan. I think with the sound shell, the comments made under the objectives that a decision is going to have to be made at some stage on that building, and that'll depend on you know, a range of technical factors in terms of the ability to repair it, financial, etc. In the Scout Hall, it was anticipated in the previous plan that the building was likely to go once the lease with the Scouts ended. So it's not really introducing anything particularly new there. Noise control provisions, again, that's just reflecting actually they belong elsewhere. That's fundamentally dealt with under other legislation, and then there's some formatting changes. So the message we're trying to give really is, look, we think there is work that needs to be done on the reserves management plan to enable the concept to be put through. There is a process that needs to be gone through with the public, which is hopefully we're going to open the door to that today. But fundamentally, we're not changing the key objectives and the values that we expect to see protected and respected down there. So really open for questions on some of the detail.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Kent.
Madam Chair, thank you, Henry, for a thorough report. Yeah, I'm supportive of the recommendations there. Can I just ask one on the makeup of elected members to hear the submissions and that, and supportive of that too? I assume with Councillor Hunt's experience in chairing these things that we don't have a chairperson assigned to this group. I assume that it would be Councillor Hunt.
Yes. I think the group will probably amongst themselves. Yes, they can choose theirs. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just having a quick read through this document, I wonder whether it wouldn't be worthwhile perhaps passing this document in front of the RMA Policy Committee first before you actually put it out, because, for example, I'd love to know what an authentic lakefront is. I've never seen an unauthentic one. Secondly, you've deleted a definition of what the lakefront actually is from the document, therefore it's not actually defined in the document. And if you turn over the page further, you'll see that you've allowed a maximum building footprint of 2,000 square metres for commercial activity, but you've totally forgotten your ticketing kiosks, which are also a commercial activity. So I think there's some work to be done on it.
I think that's a good idea, and I think before it goes, yes, I think that would be a very appropriate to go before the RMA. Is it you suggesting the RMA committee just to have a look, just to make sure that what we're actually putting out for consultation is would be, you know, the best cut. What would you say to that, Henry? I think.
Look, absolutely. We're very keen to use your expertise. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Berryman Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for outlining those points. My quick question leads on from Councillor Maxwell's in terms of the composition and makeup of the hearings panel. I'm wanting to know more about the rationale behind only having 4 councillors on there. I'm mindful of Tarbob's emphasis on the fact that the engagement with Māori and iwi is critical through this whole process. But I guess what I'm raising here is actually in terms of the final decision-making capability, it's only council sitting there. So my question is, what is the rationale on only having councillors on that, with my second point being I would like to see that extended to ensure that council's treaty partner are included in there?
Yes, I think that's a good point. And I'd like to suggest right now, yes, you wanted to? Thank you.
Could I Point just of order, Madam jump? Chair. Point of order, Madam Chair.
Can you just put your mic on for that, Councillor Stewart? Thank you.
I'd like to move that the Te Tau Board be asked to nominate a member to the hearing, to hear submissions, make recommendations to Council on the draft amendments to the Lakefront Reserve section of the Rotorua Township's Reserves Management Plan.
Second.
Thank you.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you. I should point out that the purpose of the hearing is sit and listen to what people are saying to you, not to express anyone's opinions at the thing. So there is actually no point at all in any particular group taking part. This is a case of having the right people on there who can listen to the cases being put up by the public and other parties coming in. It's a hearing.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a hearing. However, we do have, sitting around the table, we do have our Te Tato 2 members here. And if you're going to take your partnership seriously, then certainly you would put them on this. Yes, thank you. So you've. I don't think we need to take a motion on that one. Let me see. Thank you.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, if I could just give a little bit of context. I just want to respond really to the original question around the rationale. Obviously, it's your decision as a group where you take this, and the thinking we had was that this is a slightly different project than others we've put forward, and the approach we've been trying to take is to really get the partnership right in terms of doing the work around the concept and the mechanisms that need to be changed to put that through. So in terms of the work on the ground with the wider Ngāti Whakaui groupings, the Pukeroa, Te Arawa Lakes Trust and the village, the intent was to try and ensure that what was put together really did reflect the spirit of partnership and the shared thinking. And then probably picking up slightly on Councillor Kent's view, it was trying to ensure we didn't get in a position where people felt they had to act as an advocate, as a hearings commissioner, if you like. So the role really is to listen and to pass on recommendations, which then comes up to the full council. But as I say, look, subject to that small caveat, it's completely your call around the table. But the logic certainly wasn't to cut out the voice in any way. It was more in the hope, really, that we had done well enough at reflecting the voice in terms of what ultimately gets heard. But as I say, it's really for you around the table. It certainly wasn't any effort at all to reduce the importance of partner voice. It was really the contrary. It was hoping we'd done it so well it wouldn't need to be reflected again.
And I note that they're all portfolio leads that you recommended here, or that the recommendation is here. Yes, thank you.
Standing with Henry, and I appreciate where you're coming from. However, in the true spirit of partnership, we have got the Ngāti Whakaui Reserves Protocol Committee. They've got their issues, but this is members of the general public. The Mr. and Mrs. Smith who lives in Sunset Road, Springfield Road, wherever, or Rotorua, Ngākura, it doesn't matter where they're from, coming to give their views in terms of their view of what should happen at the lakefront. And that's why I think it's absolutely essential that a member of Te Tau, whether it's a member of Ngāti Whakaui direct that they put up, or someone on the Te Tau board that has the expertise in terms of, I agree with Councillor Ken. I don't think it's about that Ngāti Whakaui person expressing their views, but taking on board the spiritual aspects and all the aspects that were talked about in the presentation are borne in mind when we listen to those submissions, and also to rub off on the 4 of us that are on this panel their experience in terms of the history in the Wairua of the area. Because there are, you see, what I don't want, Madam Chair, if I may prolong this debate, is I don't want us then to have to stop and then consult someone else, and then someone else, and delay the whole thing. Because this is exactly what His Worship was getting at. This is why the previous concepts and designs were all halted. That was pier development, lakefront development, steaming pools, all sorts of things were designed right back. This is 20, 25 years ago. And they never happened because we didn't get the right people round the table. That's why I asked my colleagues to support the amendment that I've made.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I just wonder, we really don't need an amendment. We can just ask, we've got, what is it, recommendation point 4, yes, and we can just include a member of the, yes, if that's fine. So thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, Eugene, sorry, yes, Eugene.
So yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, just to acknowledge what Henry outlined, thank you for your explanation, which I get completely, and I'm comfortable with that. I think one of the interesting points which it goes through, and thank you, Councillor Sturt, for your words, because actually for me it's about involvement in a partnership process, not only at the management operational level, but at the governance decision-making level and at the hearings level. So that's the rationale that I'm coming from. So I understand completely where you come from and appreciate that response, and also I think where this is heading.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to item 4, I think that the future of the lakefront development is so important that that it should be up to the whole of this committee to be a part of that in the decision-making process, given that there are several people within council that have commission status, which are excluded at this stage. Fully agree with Councillor Sturt that Te Tato should be a part of it, and perhaps we should consider that whether the Lakes Community Board also should have an interest in the whole decision-making process, and that those 4 people that you've named were appointed at large, as were the other 6 people on this council. And I think that to get a fair representation of this decision-making process, we should be inclusive of all those nominated and elected by our ratepayers.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. I am mindful of what Councillor Kent said, is that we're actually, the committee is there to listen to all the views that come forward from the submitters. They're there to listen to everyone. So, and of course, as you know, it does come back to full council as well. So, and I think that's a good process. We'll all get an opportunity then. So, thank you. I will take your comment, Your Worship. You've got.
I tend to agree with Councillor Bentley about the Lakes Board Chair, who's not there, who has a valuable perspective. We don't need it so huge, because I'm very happy that it comes back to council. So we'll all hear it. It's just having the right mix, so we get the right, get the right report back to council for us to consider.
Thank you. Yeah, that's fine. That's all
You'll
right.
then always have a quorum for the hearings.
Thank you. So that'll be another one on the 4. Thank you. Ms Mohi?
Kia ora tātou. Just picking up from the previous presentation, I had a few comments or suggestions of change for the reserves plan. Tautoko the tono to have these other additional members, just in terms of Councillor Kent's comments, just as a practising independent commissioner, just had to clarify that the reason the particularly Māori commissioners were strengthened in that process was so that there were people that had that cultural understanding, that would hear some of those more cultural-based submissions. So it is about hearing and having the right set of ears on sometimes. So, kia ora. In terms of the the actual plans. Just a couple of comments on page 7.268. I noticed the just wanting to suggest that these names be given ingoa Māori to sit beside our Rotorua process. I see that one was removed, Rotorua Whata Drive. I'm not sure why that was, but it would be quite nice to have some duality in those namings, Village Green, Memorial Drive, and that would align with our Rotorua process. Also, skipping over to page 20 of attachment 1, I would like to suggest a additional bullet point that would have something like that's on 7.2.6.8.16. Additional bullet point in there, not restrict Te Aroa from perpetuating their traditions and practices. So it just ensures that if there are functions that, say that waka kōpapa thing I talked about, where they wanted to, say Te Aroa wanted to start kicking off those older practices that they used to have going down on the lake, that is captured and allowed for in the plan. Probably more of an interest, the next page, 21, 7.2.6.8.20. Yeah, I remember this sort of came up in one of our, in the long-term plan discussions, and it sort of jumped out at me. The trig station placed at the lakefront to mark the centenary of the New Zealand Institute of Surveyors be retained. You know, that's interesting that that's captured in there. And, you know, if we're talking about the government gardens as being the bathhouse has been a huge symbol of colonialisation. Well, if you're looking for one, that's it right there. That's the surveyors. Yeah. That was the mechanism in which the land was taken, whether by fair or by foul, was through the process of surveying. So I just wanted to raise that as a bit of a knife in there. So yeah, just can we look at that one again? And the last. Probably my last point is the following page, page 22, the last provision about the swans, that there are some protocols in there to facilitate the own use of any birds, feathers, bones, whatever, to cultural users of those things. So there might be a relationship with Te Puia, or there might be a relationship with Ngāti Whakaue weavers, that they can have a process where any cull goes down. Those feathers, if they're so desired, can get given back to be used, reused in other purposes. Yeah, whether it be bones, feathers, whatever. And that's probably my comments for that section. So kia ora.
Yes, Your Worship.
Just a point of clarification, if this is going to be referred to our commission, our independent panel, wouldn't that be the place these things get tidied up?
Yes.
Rather than us debating it large, because we can't rebut it, I'd rather put it to them to consider.
Yeah, I think so, yes, and there's quite a bit that Gina, that you've covered off. Thanks, Ms Mohi, thank you. Now, where was I? God, where am I? Should be maybe, sorry.
Madam Chair, I could just, while you're
Yes,
flicking through pages, respond to a couple of the earlier questions that were raised. There was one around freedom camping, and again, we're happy to take your advice on that, obviously. But the point of the clause as it's written is to actually say, look, this is only going to be allowed if the council makes a specific decision to allow it. And that's actually a hardening up of the protection, if you like, from what it was in the previous plan. So what it's really saying is, look, if there is to be any overnight camping down there, it will only be in designated areas that the council's approved. So really it's giving you a mechanism to say yes or no, and if yes, where. So it's simply a holding provision. It's not making any judgment at all whether there should be or shouldn't be. It's simply saying if you choose to designate it in a certain place, that's the only place they'll be allowed to go. So it really is just a little bit of an enabling provision for you. In terms of the long-term leases, I think there was a question about that, and I think there are a couple of issues. One, there obviously will need to be some discussions in terms of the commercial reality of it and what would pay and who builds the building and what sort of time periods are needed to make things viable. But also the Reserves Act actually does put in statutory maximums for leases. So where it's talking long term, we're not talking 100 years etc. I think the maximum term, and I looked to Steph, maybe 30 years actually, and 60 in exceptional circumstances or something similar.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell, and
Thank
then
you.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just from me, no, I'm very happy with the makeup of the portfolio leads and the member of Te Arawa and member of the Lakes Community Board. I think they'll be a good group. Just on page 15, with the anticipated timeframes and that, in supporting Councillor Kent's suggestion of having the RMA committee, where does that fit in there or needs to be fitted in there?
My view would be it can fit in from any time after this committee, really, and there may need to be some mechanism whereby you allow some flexibility in terms of what comes through to council, depending on the RMA committee, but there's a fairly big gap between now and the 30th of August, and then it's the public process after that.
Councillor Stewart. Thank you.
I don't know whether we make a call here, because I think in these pages a lot of things are being ruled out and some things have been highlighted, but where is it up to us as a council, or is it up to the submitters? Because I've certainly had a huge reaction that they don't believe in the development plans that we've got, even with the Pukeroa Whata development down at the lakefront, that overnight camping is an appropriate use of a park that we want to uplift and upgrade to the status that we've got. So on page 20 it says, and I hear what you're saying, Henry, overnight camping will be permitted in designated car parks only in accordance with all council policies and bylaws. Well, I honestly don't think, if we're going to do a world-class development, as Sir Bob has lent us to believe, that overnight camping and people letting out their ablutions and that sort of thing down at the lakefront is an appropriate use of that area. I mean, I know that the car parks have been brought back from where they are now and brought back towards Tanakai Street, but I still don't think that that's an appropriate place to have camper vans there overnight. So I don't know how we change that, or do we wait for public submissions, or do we signal to the public that, because we're signalling there that we're going to allow it.
Councillor, I probably don't read it like that. I think it gives you the flexibility. If you don't designate anywhere they can go, there can be no freedom camping. The other option is to take it out, or to actually write no freedom camping ever.
I'm going to proceed with the council, with all the speakers. Mr. Thomas, and then Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, most of my points have been covered off. I was very keen to see Te Tato represented in that group, so I was pleased that happened, and also thank the committee for including the Lakes Community Board there. Just because we are there, which means that we wouldn't be making a submission on the proposals down there, I would just like to make the comment that I would like to, if possible, see this document as open as possible, working around the principles of the reserves rather than necessarily limiting one particular thing in terms of a definite description of what you may or may not be able to do. I think, it's just my preference that I would have expressed if we were doing a submission.
Thank you. I think, Jeff, you'd like to comment on that. Thank you,
Thank you, through Chair. Mr. Thomas has actually put to words something that actually precisely I was thinking. The management plan that you've got traditionally operated in the lakefront is a highly prescriptive plan. What it does is that it details right down to the type of furniture that you can and cannot put into the lakefront. What staff have attempted to do in the changes is to move from a highly prescriptive plan to a plan that sets a general approach as to the purposes and management of the lakefront, which then allows the developments of plans, strategies and decisions by council to inform such matters as, will you allow freedom camping here or not? The plan sets a general principle really only that you can make that decision. And that's really the intent here. If the management plan through the consultation process drives us back into a highly prescriptive plan, which actually is detailing back down to where we were again, I think we're going to come full circle, and it would make it very difficult to manage the lakefront in a way which allows future decisions to be made to adapt within a framework. I think the framework concept is actually the right one to adopt here.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification too. Jeff, thank you. Councillor Donaldson, thank you. And then Councillor Tapson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I think the points I was going to make have been pretty much made. I think it's pretty clear the way forward is those on the panel retain an open mind and then hear the submissions and come up with a recommendation to council where it can be heard. And I think having the RMA committee have a look at the document that goes out before it comes to council to approve this recommendation is also a good suggestion, so I'm supportive.
Thank you. Councillor Tapsell. Then, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up those points. Those were my questions in the previous one, but I still had a question on the commercial aspects. So the 200,000 square metres, I think it was, you do say that that's the size of it, so that could be located anywhere. Does that account for the boardwalk itself? If it's 5 metres wide, that's plenty of potential for commercial activities to be on the boardwalk. So I'm just wondering, what control do we have? Because I know the land under the reserve, yes, we have that, this is in the Act, but what would be the rules on the boardwalk itself?
It's a good question, actually, and I think the reality is, and Steph may need to rescue me here, but I think there will be a few different legal regimes likely, because there are going to be elements of the boardwalk which are on the land, which will be covered by the reserves management plan, to the extent that the reserves management plan will enable it rather than necessarily permit it. So there may need to be another process which will actually specifically permit stuff. When you're in the lake, you're dealing with the landowner, which is the Te Arawa Lakes Trust, and you're also potentially dealing with potentially regional council issues as well. So, yeah, the complexity of a long structure which straddles land and water, yeah, they're definitely there. The plan doesn't in itself allow those things to happen. So it will enable decisions to be made under the Reserves Act and under the plan once we know what they are. I'm sorry, that's sort of, it sounds a bit convoluted, but that's just kind of the reality. This is, yeah.
And sorry, it was just a final question on the recommendation, the first recommendation. If you could please just clarify, sorry, just wait for it to scroll up, what it means by written submissions on the proposed plan, the Reserves Act 1977, would not materially assist in its preparation. I'm just ensuring that our public who may have written in on this issue before, that their views aren't being just shifted to the side on this. If you could just clarify.
Yeah, so it's quite a technical aspect of the Reserves Act. If you're undertaking a comprehensive review of a management plan replacement of it, there really is a two-stage process you're supposed to follow. The first is actually get written submissions and comments on the draft. The second is actually the decision to take that draft out publicly. So you've actually got two stages of public process. Where you've got a less than comprehensive review, and given this one actually covers all the gifted reserves, it's a kind of an omnibus reserves management plan, and given we're not substantially changing even the provisions of this, council's got the discretion to say, actually, have we been through a good enough process so far to say, actually, we're confident enough to go out with something through the Reserves Act process. And because, I guess, these plans to a varying degree, have been on the table for many, many years, and because of the discussion through LTP and because of the engagement with partners and key stakeholders down there, our recommendation is that the council's quite fine to box ahead and go out to public consultation with the proposed plan. So it's cutting out a step that you would have to undertake if you were going through a comprehensive review of a management plan.
Thank you. Councillor Gould?
Madam Chair.
And then Councillor Hunt, sorry.
I realise this is a highly important plan. It's a very valuable, will be a very, very valuable document for the future years, and all the residents of Rotorua will benefit by the decision which the council makes. I personally believe that the hearings on the 8th of October is not long enough. You know, if public submission is requested to hear before councillors, then they should be given an opportunity to speak before people. So you might need to extend that to 8th, 9th or 3 business days. The other item is that I believe that all members of this committee should hear the submission process, because then we get a fair indication from the general public, as well as reading the written responses on what their feelings are.
Well, Councillor Gould, any councillor can come along and sit and listen to the hearings, but anybody can do, well, actually everyone can do that if they so choose. But we will have an opportunity after, with the recommendations that come back, then to go through and talk about what's been proposed in terms of recommendations. So, and I think one other councillor did raise that earlier on in our discussion this morning. So.
And just on the dates, obviously, if we get 3 people submitting, it'll be over in an hour. If we get 500, we'll take the time it needs to be taken. So yeah, so the 8th is written there as an indicative date only. It's not locking submissions into one day if they won't fit. There could be less, there could be lots more.
And I think it's important to remember we're not scrapping the plan. There's just some amendments that are being made. So thank you. Councillor Hunt, sorry.
Just a bit of clarity around the overnight camping, because there was quite a lot of it all over the lakefront. There was an area established below the church and near the sound show. Now, that may or may not be an area, if one is considered in the future, but what this allows is that we recognise that there's a potential to remove somewhere else. And also, I just remind people of the benefits when we have a managed overnight camping area, increase in safety and a reduction in graffiti in those areas. So there are 2 sides to the coin, and I think that will come out in the fullness of the development. So I've no idea whether there will be one included or where it will be placed, but I think that will come out as the lakefront further develops. Just leaving the door open.
Thank you. And our last 2 speakers on this, Mr. Berryman-Kemp and then Councillor Kent.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And actually mine is just a point of clarification regarding the commercial lease issues, which I think we've had raised by councillors and stuff. I think the key concern was within the negotiation of those commercial leases, we would not like to see any restriction on cultural activities that may be enabled by the commercial lease. And to give you an idea, and I'm thinking more in terms of the water-based operators. If Te Arawa wants to have a waka event or practice for a waka event on the lake, and a commercial operator tells them they can't have that on their lake, it'll go all bad real fast. So I think that was one of the things regarding the commercial lease, not only the time, but ensuring those commercial leases do not prevent access, I guess, for cultural practice, but on a wider level for the community to be able to access the lakefront, being the lake.
Thank you, Mr. Berryman-Kemp, and Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to expedite this forward, I'm going to suggest that we make a couple of very minor changes. To point 3 there, after the words reserve management plan, insert comma, once reviewed by the RMA Policy Committee and Hearings Panel, comma.
Haven't got one yet. Oh, sorry. We do
So
actually.
it's probably not Hearings Panel, sorry, just jumping in. So yes, RMA Policy Committee, but we probably don't want the Hearings Panel reviewing before it goes out.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's fine. And the other change, if we're going to have, was it 6 people on the panel, then I think the quorum should be 5.
Yes, thank you. Now, 4, 5. 4, thank you. And we were having an additional 2, because on that one, on 4, it was the Lakes Community Board and Te Tato. Thank you. Now, with those slight amendments there, Councillor Stewart and Councillor Maxwell, are you in agreement that those be those slight changes be? Thank you. Well, Councillor Kent's going to. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we can put that up, and I'll put those. Is it 2, 3, and 4? Oh, well, I'll read them except for 4. Thank you. Number 2, that the committee recommends to council that pursuant to section 41, 5A of the Reserves Act 1977, written submissions on the proposed plan would not materially assist in its preparation. 3, that the committee recommends to council that the draft amendments to the Lakefront Reserve section of the Rotorua Township's Reserve Management Plan be adopted for public consultation pursuant to section 41(6) 6 of the Reserves Act 1977. And 4, that the committee recommends to council that the following elected members be appointed to hear submissions with a quorum of 4 and make recommendations to the council on the draft amendments to the Lakefront Reserve section of the Rotorua Township Reserve Management Plan. Those being Councillor Hunt, Portfolio Councillor Lead, District Revitalisation; Councillor Charles Stewart, Portfolio Councillor Lead, Sport and Recreation; Councillor Tanya Tapsell, Portfolio Councillor Lead, Sustainable Living; Councillor Dave Donaldson, Portfolio Councillor Lead, Sustainable Economic Development, Member of Te Tato Aotearoa Board, and Member of the Rotorua Lakes Community. Now, scroll, thank you. It's been moved by... Oh, did I not? Oh, yes, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry. I will read number 3 again. Thank you for picking that up. Beg your pardon. And I'll read number 3 again because there was a slight addition there. That the committee recommends to council that the draft amendments to the Lakefront Reserve section of the Rotorua Township Reserve Management Plan, once reviewed by the RMA Policy Committee, be adopted for public consultation pursuant to section 41 (6) of the Reserves Act 1977. Thank you. So it's been moved by Councillor Kent and seconded by Councillor Maxwell. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Contrary, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Right, now where are we with our agenda? So we jumped around a wee bit.
So you're up to number 3. Number 3 is
Yes, right. Have we got something that we could... Is there any... What about this?
maybe the speed limit bylaw?
Yes, we have. We've got a few to take, and I know that lunch is virtually ready, but I'd like to move to see if we can get through one more before we have lunch, please, councillors. And I was thinking perhaps recommendation 5, the speed limit bylaw. That's on page 95 of our agenda there, because I suspect that the alcohol... recommendation 3 and recommendation 6, there'll be quite some discussion on those two. So I wonder if, with your indulgence, we could move to recommendation 5, which is the speed limit bylaw, page 95.
Check from Auckland as part of that.
Yes.
One, and has to
Oh.
we might have to do
Oh, thank you. Thank you, councillors. Just with your indulgence, I've just been... oh, is he actually going? Sorry, we've had someone here from Auckland waiting all this time.
No, it's okay. I've actually got a workshop.
Oh, we'll work around you. Yes. What time?
Yeah, but we do have Niven, so I think proceed.
Thank you very much. Sorry for that, yes. This page, the speed limit bylaw, which is recommendation 5, page 95. Thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, speed limit bylaw, changes to speed limits be received? Thank you, Ms Mohi. Thank you, Councillor Gould. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you. Good morning, Stavros.
Morena, good morning, Madam Chair. I won't hold much of your time. I'll try to be brief. As the report indicates, at the Council meeting of the 28th of June, the speed review recommendation for Hamurama Road was recommended to return back to the Policy and Finance Committee for reconsideration. Officers have followed that recommendation and have reviewed the original recommendation. We have taken into consideration discussions we have had with the Rotorua Lakes Community Board and also the Hamurama Residents Association. And as a result of both our technical review, I'm here to confirm that our recommendation stands as it was. And basically in front of you, you have a decision to accept the original officer recommendation or to retain the current speed limits. Our recommendation is to proceed with the officer recommendation in terms of amending the speed limits as recommended, because we believe that that recommendation is founded both on the speed guidelines by the NZTA, founded on the NZTA's recommendation for standardization of speed limits across the country, and also believe that it complies with the genuine condition and requirements of that road. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you, Stavros. We'll have some questions. Yes, thank you, Mr Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I do have a question, but when it comes time to move this motion, I'd like to move the recommendation.
Thank you.
My question is, Stavros, you mentioned consultation with the Ratepayer Association and Hamurana. I understand that you or Peter attended their AGM, so you actually had the opportunity to talk directly with people, with the Ratepayers Association and people at their AGM on this, and you had full support for it. Is that correct? Yeah. Yeah. And I'd just like to comment that since this was returned, the people who I have contact with in Hamurana, I've spoken to informally and had 100% support for this to go through as it is without going back for consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Mohi?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'd just like to second that recommendation, please, and just support the this recommendation and reflect what Mr Thomas has said from a Rangiwewe perspective. We're very supportive of those changes, having more of a presence in that area now with the return of the Hamirana Springs Reserve. And yeah, we see some of the dangerous points that can happen around there, particularly in summer. So yeah, tautoko tēnei. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, it was me who championed the person who got hold of me, who was one of the 22 who supported lowering the speed right across the road to, I think it was 70 kilometres an hour. From a personal point of view, I'm happy that the speed between Fryer Road and Tiwaringa Road, which is adjacent to the Hamurana Golf Course and the Hamurana Springs, has now been lowered to 60, because that's where the children's playgrounds and toilet ablution blocks and the Hamurana Reserve as such is in between Fryer Road and Tiwaringa Road. So I'm personally supportive of that. I thank staff, I thank you, Stavros, for going to their AGM and seeking the views of the Hamurana people and obviously the Oahu people as well. And I'm happy that the motion goes forward.
Thank you. Councillor Gould and then Mrs Trumper.
Chair, thank you very much for the report. I'm totally in favour of it. This has to go to full council to be approved in probably two weeks' time. When does it take effect? Does it take effect immediately after that meeting, or is it the 1st of next month?
Thank you.
It will take effect as immediately after the council meeting, and of course as practically as possible for us to erect the appropriate signage.
Thank you. Mrs Trumper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I obviously cannot support this motion. The consultation document went out with 70 kilometres an hour, and that was something that was not approved by NZTA, as we know, and Council had an opportunity to look at 60 or at 80. Reading the submissions, most of them wanted a reduced speed, and that was fine, except when you read the actual recorded speed, the average is around the 70k, and I think the call was for it to be policed better rather than reducing the road speed down to 60. And one of our concerns was that if they were calling for a reduced speed, that actually meant that they were wanting it to have the police out there and ticketing those that were going over 70. The issue with NZTA's call to no longer have 70 as an option, it's only being phased out as a come up. NZTA themselves in the last month have actually put 70k through a village south of Dunedin, so they really do need to be mindful that what they practice what they preach. So I'm sorry, the Rural Board cannot support the motion as it is.
Thank you. Thank you. You want to comment at all? Thank you, Stavros.
Yeah, Madam Chair, very, very briefly, I think sort of regardless of the technicalities of what NZTA supports or doesn't support, at the end of the day, it is our responsibility as a road controlling authority to apply the road speed guidelines and recommend speed limits that we believe are appropriate for the road conditions, the environment, operating environment of the particular road corridor. We believe that the posting of 60 kilometers per hour and the 80 kilometers recommended is appropriate in that respect, and it is quite correct that enforcing that speed limit is a responsibility of the police. And it's also correct that posting speed limits while we apply our duties as a road controlling authority, it does not necessarily mean that some individuals will not exceed those speed limits because simply it's an individual choice. However, I believe that within this framework of the guidelines, we have applied the correct framework, we have done the correct evaluation, and our recommendation is in compliance with that recommendation. So we'll stay with that. Thank you.
Thank you. You have... Sorry, thank you. Yes, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I just wanted to comment on the 70k limit. NZTA made it very clear to this committee that they would not support a 70k speed limit through the area, and that if we imposed it, it would not be enforceable by the police. It has been very important to that community to drop the speed limit around the bridge where the kids are swimming over summer. So that meant we had to extend that, or change that 70k area, extend that area. So that in itself rules out the possibility of staying with the 70k speed limit there. No one has supported increasing the speed limit out there, and that is the only other option to decreasing it to 60. The only other option available to us is now 80 kilometres per hour. No one has wanted that, so I think we have to accept the 60k speed limit through that area.
Thank you. So I'm going to, thank you very much for those comments, thank you. I'm going to now put that, point 2, thank you, of recommendation 5, that the committee recommends to council that changes to speed limits on the following road are made in accordance with the requirements of the rule setting of speed limits 2017. So the road, the Homerana Road, the locations, and I'll go through those, each of them. The location is State Highway 36 to Fryer Road. The current speed limit 80, staff recommendation 80. Fryer to Casper Road, 70 kilometres, staff recommendation 60. Casper Road to Te Wairinga Road, 80, current speed limit, staff recommendation 60. Te Wairinga to Wilson Bay, current speed limit 100, staff recommendation 80. Wilson's Bay section, 70, current speed limit at 70 k's, staff recommendation 60 k's. Location Wilson Bay to Marama Point, current speed limit 100k, staff recommendation 80k. Marama Point to State Highway 33, current speed limit 70 k's an hour, staff recommendation 60 k's per hour. Mr. Thomas has moved and seconded by Mrs. Mohi. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Thank you. Want to, Mrs. Trumper recorded against?
Oh, anyone to drive out?
And did you record yours? And Councillor Tapsell also recorded against as well. Sorry?
So please note I didn't take part in that discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Councillor Kent.
Is it appropriate to be able to actually ask a technical question of Stavros while he's still here?
Yes, certainly. That's quite an order.
The technical question is, what authority does NZTA actually have to get rid of 70 km/h speed limits, which is a legal speed limit?
Councillor Kent, NZTA is a national transport authority, and they devise the national framework or guidelines for imposing speed limits. At the end of the day, we do have a choice to disobey, I suppose, or diverge from those guidelines that they introduced. But we will suffer the consequences of being out of kilter with national guidelines.
Well, thank you very much, councillors. We've got lunch now, and I wonder if we can come back at 12:30 and commence the afternoon session. Thank you. Mastigate quickly. Is that the word for it? Thank you. 12:30, thank you. Well, thank you. Let's reconvene our meeting, councillors. And I have no problem with upping the pace for this afternoon session, so we can, obviously we're going to take our time with all the discussions, etc., but no reason why we couldn't be looking at about 2 o'clock. But we'll see how we go. It's up to you. So we're up to recommendation 3 now, the replacement of Public Places Liquor Control Bylaw 2009 with an alcohol ban bylaw. Could I please have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Thank you, Councillor Kent. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. We do have a quorum, yes. So I'll put that to the motion. All those in favour that the report be received, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Good afternoon, Nevin, and of course Henry's there too. Good afternoon. Kia ora kōrua.
Kia ora, Madam Chair, councillors and members. Just before we start with your indulgence, can we make, there's a couple of minor corrections in the report before you. So on page 32 in recommendation 3, point 3, the third one, it should be attachment 2, not attachment 1. And on page 44 of your agenda, on the map, somehow when this was being developed, map 1 and 2 of Schedule 2 got transposed. So they just, you can see we've got Western Heights with a Pleasant Heights map and Pleasant Heights with a Western Heights map. Page 48 of your agenda. Yes, yes.
And there's another one on page 44. You've got Schedule 3 down the bottom that shouldn't be there. Correct.
Thank you. So this bylaw came about by the Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act 2012, amending the Local Government Act, where it required all alcohol ban bylaws basically across New Zealand expire in December 2018. So our current bylaw, which is the Public Places Liquor Control Bylaw 2009, wasn't due to expire till 2019. So that amendment also brought into play a change for public places. So it redefined what a public place was in relation to alcohol. So before that was in your bylaw, so you'll see that those requirements for the new bylaw were taken out because now they're covered by the Act. So apart from that, those two minor changes and replacing the word liquor with the new term alcohol, it's a replica of your 2009 bylaw, which is supported by the police. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes. Thank you. Mr. Berryman-Camp?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the report. I have a couple of specific questions, but they probably centre on so the first thing, when you go through the maps and look at the areas themselves, they do tend to focus in very strongly on what I assume are low decile areas of town. I don't see an awful lot of stuff happening in my suburb of Linmore, and I'm wondering if there's a rationale behind that. My second question is actually, can I have a reason or rationale as to why Ohanamutu seems to have almost every street within this band? It really stood out to me. And my last point is, how does this connect to alcohol licensing? Because certainly one of the things that the Te Tato Board are concerned about is this is about banning, this is about providing an alcohol ban and being able to prosecute people in breach of that. How does it connect to the retail licensing and the proliferation of those? So those are my three questions.
Thank you, Mr. Berryman-Camp. Through you, Madam Chair, so the first issue is the suburb rationale. So if you have a look at where our liquor stores are in the Linmore area, there's actually there's not many liquor stores in there. And so in the suburbs where the liquor bans are, was one, they were requested by the communities in those areas. And so nobody in the Linmore area had a concern apart from Selwyn Road area, which is in the bylaw. And so that's how that came about, supported by the police with the data. So this is traditionally where the off-licence outlets are. People would come out of those stores and then begin to drink alcohol in the immediate vicinity and cause issues within those areas. Since the bylaw came into force originally and then reviewed in 2009, the police have seen a significant decrease in those issues outside those suburban shopping areas. So that's your first one. Again, Ohanamutu, going right back to the beginning when the bylaw was first mooted, this was put forward by the Village Trust. So they came to council and said, we have an issue and we would like to address that issue. And that was supported by the village, and that's how that one came about. The alcohol licensing issues. So where there's breaches of liquor ban, the police have the power to issue infringements. Usually they get the people to tip the alcohol out into the drain so they can't continue drinking or taking it away. And we also, that is noted within their systems for when the licence renewals come up. So if we have a premise that is regularly featuring on the radar of either the police or my licensing team, that is addressed during that process. So in relation to licence and licence hours in the suburban areas at the off licences, over the last period since the new Act came in, the District Licensing Committee, through their hearings and through their decisions, have been able to reduce 19 of the 21 premises licensed hours to help address the alcohol issues in the suburbs and also the liquor ban issues.
Thank you for that excellent and comprehensive answer, which did cover off my questions, but I guess what it does moot from a wider perspective is, again, I think, and that's why the last part of your answer was actually really beneficial. If the information from this is being used to be able to put us in a stronger position to restrict the sale of alcohol in those low deprivation areas, then that's great. And also thank you for your answer regarding Oha and Mutu, because certainly if local residents and villages had requested that, then I'm comfortable with that too.
Yes, well, I know one family down there that would certainly be appalled if they thought there was going to be a carte blanche liquor ban in Ohinimutu, because you know what happens there at Christmas. Everybody walks down through the village and goes to visit the whānau, so it's been happening since Mairano. So, however, I'll talk about that later. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually my point was on the same as well, because when I looked at this, I was very concerned that it seemed to be targeting only the lower socioeconomic areas, and also knowing the nature of the Ohinimutu village and the openness, I was very wary out of all of them to be targeting that one so thoroughly. So my question was, why are they only the low socioeconomic? But I guess it's still a question I want to ask, because it's also on the reserves. So not only is it around the shopping areas, but it is also targeting the reserves. So why are we still targeting the reserves in the lower socioeconomic area and not all of the reserves across the entire Rotorua district? Or within the Rotorua CBD would probably be more correct.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Through you, Madam Chair. The reserves that were targeted were previously reserves that we had issues with. So, and this was started by the Fordlands community in their revitalisation project, where they were groups of people were gathering in the reserves, drinking, breaking bottles, leaving glass there on the reserves, and so that's how that came about. What wasn't supported by the police was a district-wide ban, if you like, on all reserves, because they said it was unenforceable by them, because they are the people that actually do the work. And it was also against, like, some of our lakes, like if you think of the Blue Lake and that, where people go, Hannah's Bay Reserve, where people go to have a picnic, a barbecue, and they have a sociable situation where sometimes they imbibe in alcohol beverages. So it didn't want to be a total ban, but where there have been issues raised, we wanted to work in partnership with those communities.
Thank you, and I'm glad you mentioned that point actually, because I mean, by no means do we want to start taking rid of the rights of our residents to enjoy a barbecue at the reserves, for example. Oh gosh, no, I lost my train of thought.
Better class a drinker. No, really, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, you know, so you need to be very aware of that. There are some people that they're saying if you're in those sort of areas, then obviously that's where there's going to be trouble. Hey, you go to some of the other reserves, better class a drinker. Still alcohol. Still alcohol.
Yeah. Sorry, my question was actually, you had mentioned on page 32 the confidential intelligence report provided by police. I tried really hard to find it, but I actually couldn't. So was that actually supposed to be given to councillors? Because that would have been probably answered a lot of the questions that we do have on why they're targeting certain areas, and even the percentage of alcohol-related being 62%, for example.
Rosemary was the author of this report, and this was part of her pre-consultation process to get the bylaw before you. I haven't seen that report either, but I know from my licensing team that we regularly get information intel from the police that is confidential, but we do share that with the District Licensing Committee. But in this case, I couldn't answer you why it's not in the package that was provided to councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Councillor Donaldson, then Ms Mohi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Possibly less of a question, but an answer to my colleagues who've answered questions about the targeting of certain reserves. So I was around when this bylaw was put in place, and when the old bylaw went out for consultation, Selwyn Road, which I live very close to, wasn't on there. But there was a very quick conversation in our community because that reserve had been plagued by people parking in the car park and drinking all hours of the night, and then invariably the reserve was covered in donuts the next morning from wheel spins all over it. So council worked with the tennis club, who are also on that reserve, and it was included in the liquor ban area, but also the tennis club has a licence, so their little footprint is licensed for their enjoyment of alcohol post matches for functions, etc. So it's very much a case of sending it out for consultation, and any community that has a concern about antisocial behaviour on their reserve can put request. And look, Selwyn Road was backed up by police accounts of having to attend incidents and call-outs for V8s stropping all over the park, and so that's why it was included at that time. We did steer away from blanket ban bylaws because reserves around lakes, fishing season, people like to enjoy a barbecue and go fishing, that sort of thing. So it's just a case of, I guess, putting this out for consultation, and Madam Chair, I'm happy to move points 2 and 3 to send it out for consultation. But if anyone has a concern about a reserve that's not included, just mention to that community to make an approach and make a submission.
Thank you. Ms Mohi?
A lot of the points I wanted to raise have already been covered, but yeah, just it's more that social comment about load deprivation, lots of bottle stores, in the complete opposite case in more affluent areas. That's a concern. There's a particular site on Facebook that this one particular alcohol store pops up all the time with conflict with their patrons, the one on Sunset Road. And you got to wonder, because if I was just sitting here thinking, there's 1, 2, 3 around the block, 3 bottle stores around 4 block. So, you just got to wonder, why are you there, man? You're there getting all this grief, getting all upset. Move. Just too many. There's too many, and I just wanted to make that, just endorse what everyone's saying. It's not right. Kia ora.
Thank you, Ms Mohi. Councillor Kent?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Page 42, clause 8, which states that the bylaw is not applicable. Looking at 8(1)(e), I read that as it would be permissible to carry alcohol in an opened can or a glass. That can be fixed by changing the wording to in an unopened bottle or other closed container. Because an open can or a glass is a container.
Oh, hang on. In case of alcohol in an unopened bottle or other container. Or the closed container, isn't it? Is that a closed container? Are we looking at a closed container or something like that? Or an unopened container? Unopened.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. This is for, if you go back to 8(1), it's for activities covered by a licensed area. So when you're in the licensed area, you want to drink from that bottle or can, and this allows for that.
What it states here is, if you've got the wording, in the case of alcohol in an unopened bottle or other container, that can be taken from a special licence area into a public place. You're allowed to do that here. What I'm saying is the container should be closed, because the definition of other container would include just a glass or an open can.
That's right. Unopened. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, then Councillor Hunt. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. I was just going to support Councillor Donaldson. I was here in 2009 when we redid this, and there was quite a lot of support from the suburban areas selling alcohol. They had a problem with people buying it, sitting in the car, drinking it, and causing problems and a lot of litter. So largely there has been support from that, and I'll look forward to seeing what support comes back from the community. I accept the comments of the Tato and other members that there is a proliferation and they are in our lower socio-economic areas, but that is a commercial decision made by those operators. And when communities have issues, then when those licences come up for renewal, that's the time that they need to have documented, fact-based evidence to support their objections. And we're very happy if the community do have that, because it certainly helps the overall aspect of managing alcohol in our community. But we are bound by the laws and the 2012 Sale and Supply of Alcohol Act in making our decisions about who does get licences. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Look, I have to say that I take a little bit of exception by you saying that, yeah, and of course you are correct when you say that those bottle stores that have proliferated in some of the lower socio-economic areas, it's a commercial decision. Somebody made that, put it in there. Now we know what the social impact is. Now we're going to put a complete ban in those areas and in their parks, etc., in the reserves, because now we know what the problem is. So, you know, we allow one thing, on one hand we allow somebody to undertake a commercial activity, and on the other, when it all hits the fan, we say, oh well, this, you know, you're not helping the community, so we've got to put this ban in place, and then everybody is affected. Everybody is affected. And those bans are going to be 24/7. And I know Ohinimutu, obviously, and I know what happens there at certain times of the year. And everybody does waltz down the street, and they visit whānau with their packs and everything, opened or unopened. So, you know, it'll be interesting to hear what comes back from the community, you know, when it goes out to consultation. Because the people who request these things be put in place are the ones that probably don't drink, or, you know, drink in moderation, or goodness knows whatever. But there are a lot of people that do enjoy it, and we're saying that there are some reserves that we're not going to impose a ban on, because they're a better class of drinker. You drink, you drink. And we're saying, no, you're you're on the other side of the track, so that means, you know, you're not uptown, you're downtown. You're on the wrong side of the tracks. So we've got to put some safety things, because we're going to look out for you. I think we need to really watch that. So I'm going to be very interested to see what feedback comes in through the submission process.
If I may just address one thing you raised, Madam Chair, the 89 Act allowed for the proliferation of liquor licences anywhere anyone applied for one. There were no controls.
That's right.
You just put your hand up and you could put them anywhere, and they ended up all over the country in largely our lower socioeconomic suburbs. So we're now having to try and shut the door once the horse is bolted and manage those very effects that you speak about. And yes, of the submissions that have come in the past, many are from people who consume alcohol. And essentially this is to guide those law-abiding and those who break the law. So if the law is broken, then the police now have some ability to manage the fallout from that. And yes, some of those are in exactly those same suburbs. Not surprisingly, really. It certainly isn't to penalise people who, as in other reserves that haven't come to the attention of the police, to penalise people, as has been spoken, having a picnic or a barbecue and sharing some alcohol, as goes on all over our community and all over the country. But it is to help the police and help our community, particularly those that have requested exactly that from us, to do something about the problem in their neighbourhoods. And I look forward to their feedback, because this is what this is really setting out to do, to assist our community in achieving their goals and their aspirations.
And I guess just to put it slightly into perspective again, Madam Chair, this is This is essentially driven by the change in legislation in 2012, which brought the current bylaw to an end. It killed it dead. This is essentially taking out the bylaw that's already in place for public consultation. So, you know, your point's really valid in terms of this is the time for the community to talk, but we're not proposing at this stage any dramatic change at all. We're putting out what is effectively the status quo and has been for some years.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, yes, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just actually going to second the motion.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for that discussion. I'll put points 2 and 3. The recommendation that consideration has been given to the requirements of the Local Government Act 2002 as set out in the report, and it is proposed to make the alcohol ban bylaw as set out in attachment 1. And 3, that the committee recommend to council that the attached statement of proposal and alcohol ban bylaw be approved for special consultation, and that council hears and deliberates on any public submissions made to the proposed alcohol ban bylaw attachment 2. It's been moved by Councillor Donaldson.
Of order, Madam Chair.
Oh,
Should the first one also be attachment 2?
No, well, there
Thank
was
you.
a different...
Just clarified that.
Yes, thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Mr. Thomas. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Oh, thank you, yes. Recorded against, thank you very much. Now we go... Thank you. Recommendation 6. That is recommendation 6, isn't it? That's right. This is the rates review process. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report, the rates review process? Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. It's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Kia ora kōrua. Good morning. Hello there, JP.
Morning, councillors. Just as a bit of an overview of this report, Una and I will just cover it off together. But councillors, we're just trying to sort of follow up on the view that we wanted to undertake a rates review during this financial year. And obviously part of that is to make sure that timing-wise it's effectively undertaken by February, March of next year. So we do have a time frame in mind if there are any changes that come out of a rating review. So obviously if there's any changes to the rating framework, there is a formal consultation requirement, and the intention would be that would have to be part of the annual plan consultation document as an amendment to our LTP. So really for us it's a case of saying, working back from there, if that's what we're looking to do, with a view that if there's any changes to the rating framework, they come in from 1 July, how do we work back from that to give you some timing? So as far as the process is concerned, councillors, what we're laying out here is a process that starts saying, okay, if that's the critical time for making decisions about formal public consultation, if there's to be any changes for the next financial year, how do we step forward through that? So what's being proposed in here, councillors, is a phase of discovery. So we do some focus groups and we actually get an understanding from the different stakeholders and sector groups what they see as the potential issues, challenges or perceived unfairness within the current rating framework with specific focus groups. And we then work through those in a process of workshops before each SPNF committee meeting. So obviously, councillors, there's often that challenge of making sure we have everyone available for workshops. So what we're setting forward in here as part of that process is really to take the 2 hours before a scheduled SPNF meeting, or actually put back the time for a start of an SPF meeting from 9:30 to something like 11:15, so that each SPNF up until Christmas we could have a 2-hour workshop to explore the feedback from that discovery phase, look at identifying some key principles about how you would like to a rating framework to work, and then evaluate that feedback from those different stakeholder and sector groups against those principles to determine what you see as the key issues to then explore and look at within those workshops. So that's the way we've envisaged structuring the rating review. So it's not a case of showing up to you today to say, here's the terms of reference for a rating review, but instead just to seek that feedback from those individual stakeholder groups and sector groups, and for you then to spend probably the first workshop looking at what you see as the key principles behind a good rating framework. And once you've got that evaluation, you can compare that information, and in effect that becomes your scope of a review. So just see if anyone wants to add anything to that, but certainly happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Sorry, Your Worship, then Councillor Kent.
Just a question about why we've left the sustainable development contribution out of scope, because that's an interesting discussion for the whole of the community to be involved. It's not really a sector one, but for the whole of the community to consider.
Through Madam Chair, I think the key thing here is we've taken the view that this is a rating review income, and what we're seeing here is that there will be issues that get raised. It's just how big do you want to make this piece if we're at this stage moving forward with a view, what might we need to change around our rating framework? If there's issues that get elicited through that discussion, then they need to be built into other processes. We haven't actually settled down to say how would we start the conversation about sustainable development contributions. There's a significant amount of work to be done there about identifying the scale of growth projects through which a level of funding is required. So we're probably talking at least a year, potentially 2-year process. I think when we did the LTP, we didn't have a view of any development or sustainable development revenue coming until at least year 3. So we have the opportunity to work through that at a speed, I think, that justifies the complexity of it.
Yeah, if I can just comment on that, because we're all talking about funding tools, and we've got the Productivity Commission, review going on at the moment. It just seems such a pity when we're going out on what is the old paradigm of a rating review without looking at innovation or where we might be able to get other people might think it's a great idea, And I just feel we're missing that opportunity on that one. I know why you're trying to keep it pure, but...
I suppose, Madam Chair, that the key here is that we have a revenue base to be obtained through rates, and you're absolutely correct. That is the narrow box. How that is allocated within that box is the focus we've identified here for the rating review. I think if we're starting to say what other income sources are there, what other creative mechanisms, probably opens us up to a significantly larger, longer, and a process that I think to a degree we will be led by a time frame from the government as well. So I think that's why we're very much trying to stay in the space of saying, hey, we have a revenue to collect through rates. What are the mechanisms for rating collection, and who should be contributing to those mechanisms, and keep the scope reasonably narrow at this stage if we're to be successful and have something completed by February of next year.
I actually accept that answer, because the Productivity Commission will generate enormous discussion and discussion documents that will be driven through LGNZ, but as long as we're part of that and our community's part of that, and that report's not due for a while, so yeah. Okay, I accept that.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is why we've got remissions policy and multiply owned Maori land remission policy out of scope, yet you've included them in the focus groups.
I think there's a combination, Councillor, good point. For us, again, it's a question of, does this create an additional amount of time that should or should not? So at this stage, it was a case of garnering the issues. And for us, some of that is governed by statute around multiply owned Māori land and the treatment of multiply owned Māori land. So we were looking to say, well, what specifically are and it's back into that allocation, we need to collect this much revenue through rates, who should be paying and how should it be paid. By moving sideways into but how do you not pay and what reasons would you not pay become a separate conversation and a separate exercise. For us, a case of saying out of scope is out of scope of this piece, but not out of scope of a discussion that might immediately flow into a remission policy review or discussion as well.
But surely the amount of remissions determines how much revenue you've got to collect and therefore affects everyone else. So surely the remissions policy, both the straightforward remissions policy and the multiply owned Maryland remissions policy, should be considered as part of this exercise.
Accept your point, Councillor. I think we do have to raise that issues and make a judgment probably after we've finished that discovery phase about whether it does need to be in scope or not. We've generally got remissions policies and remissions on multiply owned Māori land that simply follow the legislative minimum requirements.
Thank you. So it could well be part after we've got. Thank you.
Yeah.
Did you want to make a comment? Not at this time. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, JP. Just also referring to the scope on page 105. All mechanisms and targeted rates. So, is universal metering of water in or out, or for us to decide, because that has capital capex implications if we were to introduce it to the urban area. But it's the more I hear around various forums, it's a discussion that's charging at us and needs to be had.
Councillor, I think there's a case here of saying, what do you want to achieve by February of next year? So if we were to turn around and say a fairer allocation for water use is volumetric, then I think that's a signal that will drive future decision making. The cost then and the potential couldn't be something that we would turn around and change a rating framework for 1 July. So I think a case of saying all allocations. So if it is that view of saying, look, we've got a fairness question around lifestyle blocks, businesses, but we've got an issue around volumetric for residential, and we have a clear view that that's the most appropriate mechanism for charging. I think that's the kind of signal that would come out of a rates review if that's what happened. Now, how you would implement it may mean that doesn't happen for 1 July. That may be a 2, 3, 5 year horizon because of the cost and capital involved. But it's one of these signals about saying, with a rates review, you've got to look at what your issues are, what are the opportunities, and then what is that direction of travel, and what's the most appropriate.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, if I could just respond. I think there is a fairness issue, because I think this is part of the key to solving the short-term holiday rental issue. If there's an Airbnb with 9 guests in it next door to a house with just 2 retired people living in it, both paying the same for water, and where's the fairness in that? But there's also the sustainability question as well, and there's the sustainability of our infrastructure. At the wastewater treatment plant, where historically we hear that where this has been implemented, there's a 30% reduction in inflows to wastewater treatment plants. So, so I just throw it out there, and I just think it cuts both ways, both to fairness and sustainability.
And I suppose, Madam Chair, just flowing on from that, I think this is part of the reason why I think those discovery focus groups are so important. You will see a whole bunch of issues that you'll have the opportunity, particularly when you think about what is a fair and appropriate principle-based rating allocation, how you take forward. And I think that's one of the important things. Some of them might be easy to resolve, and others might have a longer term gestation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, Are we just asking questions now, or can we make comments?
Make a comment and
Make comments
yes,
as well.
right,
Yeah.
fine.
It's just that the Lakes Board does have a number of concerns around this report and a number of questions as well. And I guess my first comment would be that when Council passed the resolution to do a rating review, it was around a full rating review, and we have a concern that the way this is structured may be limiting the size of the review down. So I'd be very supportive of the comments that Councillor Kent and Councillor Johnson and the Mayor have made around why things are or are not included. And, as a bit of a background, this is our first chance at a rating review since we've changed quite dramatically the direction of this council into a forward-looking council with Rotorua 2030. And there are new challenges, and there could easily be new tools that we should be looking at, because we're not going to be able to revisit this in 3 years' time. This will be it for a while. So I think we do need to look widely. And so I come back to the focus groups, and I note that the time really you've put aside for the focus groups is really from now. You've got a strategy of focus groups, bringing that information to council or workshops before SPNF, and the first one of those workshops is kicking off in September. So it seems a very short time for those focus groups that you haven't put together yet. So the Lakes Board, I guess, is concerned about how you will get relevant information out of those focus groups. You've got to get them together, you've got to get a response, and you've got to analyse it in 4 weeks. At the very least, we would be concerned that for the lakes area, section of the community that are the absentee owners, who tend to be paying the higher rates in our areas, are very unlikely to be able to participate in it in that short time frame. I wonder, is it possible that the first council workshop is treated as a focus group? Look, I think rating is a really complex issue, and if you have a 3-hour meeting with a group of 10 people, you're going to spend the first 2 hours trying to explain to them how rating actually works. Then you're going to spend 3/4 of an hour listening to them complain about their own rates, and then you might get to some useful information. On the other hand, we've got a group of people here who understand rating and what we see as its flaws, or what councillors see as its flaws and its strengths. I think is a really valuable input to have. So is that possible that they run concurrently at the start? You had set out a very sort of staged model there. So that's my first question. I guess I have a concern that by just going out to the focus groups and getting what they immediately see as a problem or an issue for them is actually really narrowing down the range of topics that should be and would come up for discussion under a rating review. And I really feel we should have the ability to have it as a wider discussion. So I guess those are my questions.
I'm just going to try and reply to those. So I'm just going to pick up on the focus groups first. And I think it is picking up on what you said about the first workshop for elected members, which would be next month, wouldn't be bringing back focus group material to you. That would be, in essence, yourselves being the focus group. So at that stage, looking at starting to work on what those principles of the rating framework may be, and starting to look at finding up or thinking about what a scope for the rating review might be like. Then in the subsequent workshops following that, there would be the opportunity for, when focus group material comes back through, that you're weaving those into testing those or evaluating those against the principles you have set, and then working towards a process where you come up with a potential proposal that goes out for, or may go out for consultation. So that answer does touch on the scope. So what we're trying to set out through this process is actually really defining the scope of what you want the rating review to encompass. We all know rating reviews are a big deal. And so to remain focused and really get to, I guess, the hearts and minds of our people, getting to, working towards a proposal which you see as being fair and equitable and may have solutions to what are the issues or problems that people are saying exist with the rating review framework at the moment. So it's trying to work on that rather than starting from, it's just taking a different approach from starting from a blank piece of paper and yourselves building up a proposal. So it's almost, it's like doing a two-step. It's go out to some focus groups, get responses back from people around what do they see as the issues, bringing those back to yourselves against a set of principles that you have collectively decided you want to measure those problems and issues against, and then working through those to come up with a solution or solutions to those perceived solutions and going out with a proposal on that. I can't remember, sorry Phil, what was the third part?
I think, you know, it was the structure of those focus groups as well, and you know, sort of the shortness of time you've got for them, and if they are, you know, are they a one-off 2-hour, 3-hour gathering, you know, that I really don't feel that gives people time to absorb complexities of rating, to think about the issues outside of their own things, and then to come back with a reasoned response. You know, there needs to be a bit of gap of time in there, perhaps. So I'm really interested in the structure of those, because I think if you keep it to one single session, what you're actually doing is by default limiting the range of the responses you're going to get back, and that will limit the range of what we're addressing in a rating review.
Councillors, I think one of the things that Mr Thomas is touching on is probably the fundamental that we think is important if you're to run a rating review differently from how we've talked about rating in the past, which is trying to elicit from people, in effect, their perceptions of value from rating and the issues they see in the fairness, and then matching that against a conversation about principles and principles of a rating framework. Because historically, we've touched on it, and Mr Thomas almost described it there, in some of our absentee land owners or property owners who feel they pay too much rates. It starts to get to some of the issues around the principles of rating that we need to talk about. So our risk in not keeping it at an issues and problems and perceptions matched against a discussion of the principles of rating means we go straight to a solution or a direct line between I feel I do not get enough value from a value of my property and the size of my rates, to a mechanistic discussion of, so how do I fix that? I fix that by putting up the UAGC or putting down a differential, and that's actually we've got to try and avoid that discussion. So I think that's why fundamentally we've tried to say within each of the sort of the sector groups, there is perceptions and views of fairness and equity and reasonableness around rating that need to be talked about and elicited. And then we need to have a matching conversation about what do we believe are the principles of a good rating framework, recognising that we have a number of statutory tools and they're not very long to actually create a rating framework. So this is where, you know, my fear of any rating review is that we descend into a discussion where someone says, can you show me a UAGC at 250, 500 and 750 matched with 6 or 7 versions of differentials, and by the way, can we peel off another couple of targeted rates? I think we've lost the plot if we turn a rating review into that direction. So I think we've been thinking really hard about how to do this, because it is a very problematic and complicated issue. So the view is trying to elicit people's views from their particular sector or place in life, state in life, and property ownership, and then matching that against quite a firm or clear view of what are our principles of a good rating framework. And then from there, that creates the opportunities to say, there's something wrong here, or do we need to explore that mechanism further? So this is where we thought, if we take those workshops over that first couple of months, you've had a session as elected members on the principles, and then we start trying to take that feedback and at least match that. And that really, for us, determines how much further and where the rating review goes. So we're not trying to chart it out to say we know exactly what it is, and that's why I made that comment about we don't know what the terms of reference are, because we haven't got that information back. And equally, our kind of straw person of what's in scope and what's out of scope could be very different by the time we've finished that session on principles and by the time we've finished that first discovery phase. So I think we're trying to lay out a process to at least step us forward over the next couple of months, and as a scale or a size of review, it will vary. So sorry, that's not a very clear answer, but I think it's a nature of trying to do it in a different way.
Yes, it is. And we've put a lot of thought into that, into the process, and getting to the first principles first. But I'm just going to ask, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
If I can just briefly.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This through the chair. No, I just want to emphasise a couple of points that JP has actually drawn out. The first point being is that when you talk about a rating framework, you're not talking about the quantum of rates paid. You've already set that through the long-term plan. So the rating framework really, therefore, is how do you wish rates to be distributed across the communities of Rotorua. That's fundamentally what the discussion's about. In doing that, there are some core principles or key principles that need to be drawn out. Do you believe, for example, that everyone has got an equal ability to pay? And if the answer to that is no, well, then there has to be some other principles that are quickly set in behind it, for example, that says, well, those who have got lesser ability to pay, should they pay less? So those are the concepts of the principles JP is trying to draw out, to try and understand, so what are the principles that will drive the fundamental ways that you end up agreeing as to how rates are distributed across our communities. The problem is that if you start talking about UGCs, or Uniform Annual General Charges and so on, you jump into the solution before you've defined the problem or actually clearly identified measures of success. And measures of success are all about the principles. So that's where we're starting. The focus groups, the workshops are all about not talking the mechanisms of rating, but talking about what do the different communities of Rotorua perceive as to the fairness and equity in the way rates are distributed. That's fundamentally what the first phase of this process is all about. Once you've got the principles identified, once you've got an understanding clearly about how the current rating system matches those principles and how it distributes rates, you're then at a point of actually making a determination of, do you wish to do anything differently, or do you wish to actually start looking at some alternative areas? And at that point you can bring in a range of different topics for discussion.
Thank you very much, and I think that is clear, and I think that was when we were looking to put this paper together for councillors' consideration, that's where we landed at this point, and I think it is a fair process that we've been looking at. And it'll be interesting to know that what will fall out of this at the end of the day. There might be some issues and there might be very few, so that could give us a real good steer on where we have to focus our attention. Thank you for that, Jeff. Councillor Gould. Councillor Gould, sorry. Councillor Gould and Mr. Berryman-Camp.
Thank you for what you've just explained, JP. But my questions, I know some of them may have been partly been repeated, but why workshops? Are they open to the public submissions, and can they be heard? But those questions relate to the answer which was given to a retirement village owner over the long-term plan. He said he was going to be given the opportunity to during the rates review for his problem to be sorted. Now, the issue is, I know that we're not reducing the amount of rates paid, but there are a lot of sectors out there which feel that they've been paying too much in rates, or that the rating part is unfair on their particular industry. The other question is a CE of the retirement villages for the whole of New Zealand, representing the 7 retirement villages owners in Rotorua, wanted to be heard as well, and he wasn't given an opportunity. So will these types of people be given an opportunity to speak, and will it be open to the public?
Councillor Gould, just for clarification there, you're mixing two parts of the process up. The first part of the process, which we've just discussed here today, is to go and hear from focus groups. The example that you use of the retirement villages, they would likely be a focus group or part of a focus group. So they'll be able to come forward and put on the table effectively what they consider their issues to be. When all of that is brought back to yourselves and you incorporate that with what are your principles and you work through all of that and may come up with a proposal, that proposal would go out for special consultative procedure and it would go through the public hearings component of it, and then further decision making made on yourselves for you as the council to set whatever rates might be at the end of that. So just be clear of the very sort of the different stages of the process there.
Mr. Berry.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that. Really think my question's just points of clarification. So, and I've total got a lot of what's been said thus far. Certainly that time frame in terms of focus groups to get quality input feels relatively tight. Having said that, I did appreciate in the paper the wide breadth of groups, and particularly, I guess, from a Te Ao Māori perspective, I was impressed with that. So thank you for that. Mindful that we're just bouncing into Māori Trust AGM season, which actually could be an opportunity for engagement or could be a reason why not a lot of people turn up. So again, reinforcing that need to consider those timeframes so that quality input comes in. My question with this, and I support the concept of trying to get those framing principles. That actually clarifies things for me. However, based on that, what I didn't see in the paper is how these tie to the strategic priorities for council. So, and I'm not too sure if that's, the table that was up there with all the long-term goals and everything else too, is that the sort of feedback and input you're wanting as a result of the focus groups? Are you wanting the focus groups to help inform the principles that this committee applies to the rating review?
Through Madam Chair, the key focus for us through the focus group is understanding the issues and their views of problems or fairness or equity coming through that. So their understanding, and part of that is also a value question. So now, but ultimately the agreement of us, and so in a way that scratches the surface of a principles discussion, and certainly that's the kind of feedback from those focus groups that I believe will be useful to bring to councillors to help them frame the principles around an allocative tool. So rating is an allocative tool for the revenue we're seeking to collect. So that is where those discussions and the focus group feedback is matched with the legislation and also the council's desire to see those principles of an allocative tool used appropriately. You made that comment to some of our vision and direction. I think, again, the principles around an allocative tool, but I think council also needs to look towards its vision and aspirations for our community, because that's important. At the bottom of our vision, we talk about a place for everyone. So that's got to get to the nub of one of those principles about that fairness and equity distribution and some of those guiding allocations. So I think you can't divorce the two, but the principles have got to be around the legislation and about an allocative framework for that revenue collection.
Thank you. Ms Mohi, and then Councillor Tapsell.
Kia ora, kōrua. Yeah, just wanting to pick up on some of the point raised by Councillor Donaldson around the the parts that are being discussed or out of scope. I think the water discussion is an important part of that, and so support what he's raised in terms of the impact it does have on the cost to this council, and the savings that could be had if we started thinking a little bit wider and look at what's happening around the rest of the country with that lens in place. Just wanting, again, I see you've done some really good identification on some focus group methodology, and as Mr Berryman Kemper's pointed out, some good scoping around the Māori issues, Te Aroha issues in there. I just wanted to sort of suggest there additional grouping, perhaps, that would capture quite a few of these. Is the district plan talks about special Māori villages and identifies 3 in the urban area, but there are many in the rural area as well, so they will fall under some of these headings. However, they have a unique property to them that they're a wide family unit, basically. So I would suggest perhaps approaching those sort of groupings, and then you'd have a really good opportunity to refine some of the presentations that you do give to those groupings, because, and there's probably more comment for all of us to remember, is that Māori land is inalienable. Am I saying that right? You know what I mean, can't be sold. So there's a different thing in play. So therefore the remission process does become an important scope in that discussion. So maybe it is in scope for those particular groups where it is in a real, it actually applies to how they do their everyday business, or live, actually. It's not business, it's live. So just the suggestion there, and I like the again, supporting that whole, let's look at the principles of what we're doing first. Legislation's a good thing, but principles are principles. They're not restricted by the law. So I think be open to that wider scope that people will put up, regardless of whether we say we're only talking about the law or not. And yep, that's probably it. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Mohi. Thank you, Ms Mohi. Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this report. I understand it's a very complex issue. I am feeling a little bit confused. If I make an observation, I think a lot of other people are feeling a bit confused as well. What the Chief Executive has set out actually nailed it. That's what we needed to hear. But what I see in this paper isn't quite what has been spoken around this table, and I don't think that the full scope of what we're wanting is identified in this paper. So I'm not too surprised that the Chair of the Lakes Community Board is also having questions around this, because I do feel quite sorry for all the members of the community, particularly the Lakes Community Board, that have been asking for a rates review for a very long time. So I must say I am slightly disappointed at the breadth of what has come back to us, and that it is very small in scope. In fact, may I be so audacious to say that perhaps we should ask for the paper to come back with just those extra things that you mentioned on it as principles to the council meeting. And I just say that because if any member of the public picks this up, they're going to have no idea what we're going to do. The timeframes mentioned, it says it talks about timeframes. There are no timeframes in here. There's no dates on when it's going to be completed. There's no dates of the workshop. And I am also very concerned about only 10 people from each of those focus groups. Who is it? Who are we to say what 10 people, and how will we be able to identify 10 people within these areas? Because at the end of the day, it's not about these groups. It's about the individual residents and families of these groups, of which all have different or have their own different experiences with this. So if I can just take it back to those 3 key words of being fair, transparent and appropriate in the way that we rate all of our activities and resources, I'm not entirely sure that this process does deliver that. I'm not entirely sure that this process does due justice to the people that have been asking for this rates review, and I alliterate for quite a while now. I do think that this process will be a lot easier for council, but dare I say a lot harder for our community to have a say. So I would just like to see at some stage a better way of how how we're going to do that. And I understand we're not thinking about the how yet. We're not talking about the mechanisms, which when it does come up, I would like to see us looking much more deeply into the funding mix and the tools and mechanisms that we do use with expert opinion, because we're only experts at the way we do it now. I think it's very open, and the local government New Zealand has also been looking at funding mechanisms too. So I just wanted to give that feedback, because as it is, I'm very concerned, and I'm actually not able to support it because I don't think it truly alliterates what we're trying to achieve and what the community was calling for in asking for a rates review in the first place.
Yeah, oh, yes, Your Honour. Oh, sorry. That's right. Yeah, we need to and make that clear. Yes.
If I can try, you'll recall that during the LTP process, there had been a couple of conversations around the table about the need for a rating review. You'll remember our advice back to you during that time was that to undertake any form of a rating review during an LTP, and even more importantly, I guess, on the back of a revaluations, brings about a whole set of issues and problems in itself. And we got to the agreement that to divorce or separate the two processes, so that A, you could get through the revaluations process and really see the impacts on that. And you will recall that we had those conversations in the LTP about those revaluation movements and what was the outcome of that accordingly. And also that you'll remember that we had agreement that going out in an LTP, not to get your right debate with the community confused with changes to a rating model. So following that, there was then also a call, and I think it came from the Lakes Community Board as a recommendation to this table, that staff go and bring back a process on how we could step into a rating review process. We believe that we've put that paper to you on a process. So what this paper is doing, it's not setting any solution, it's not identifying, sorry, take a step back, it's not identifying any problems that are perceived in the rating framework at the moment. What it's stepping out to do is to say, we need to get a scope for a rating review. You as elected members need to set that scope and you need to identify the problem, and we're suggesting that you do that on a principles based, but you need the opportunity to workshop that amongst yourselves and all be in agreement as to what those principles are. So this was just a process to be really high level, to start things off, for you to start working towards the identification of the problems and what you may like to look at wrapping some solutions around.
And Madam Chair, I suppose the last bit is, I heard a discussion then about revenue review as opposed to rates review. Suddenly we're out of the box of we need to collect this much funding through rates, and how do we do that fairly against a set of principles and an appropriate framework versus revenue collection to fund councils. So I think that's where we start getting into the space where government is looking. A lot of people are looking, but we're into things then of fees and charges, direct charges, development contributions, if that's a mechanism, which I would say there is highly unlikely you'd be capable of finishing that by February of next year.
Thank you. Jeff, you wanted to add?
Just a couple of brief comments. I think there's a truism that if you ask people about tax, it's probably highly likely they're going to say they pay too much. And I think probably the same would be said for rates as well. The question then really that needs to follow is though the level that you are paying fair and equitable, and is it transparent as to how that level is set? Now that's the key focus with respect to any rating framework. The risk that we have and we see it sometimes played out in annual plan processes, is that at the end, the CFO puts up a table of property values by location and how much rates they're going to pay. And there's an argument suddenly entered into about let's adjust this or let's adjust that so we can get a slightly different distribution than the one that we've got that's been put up on the screen. Now, the risk in behind that is a concept, in my view, called risky shift. And that what is it that you're trying to achieve through that process, and how is that taking you towards or away from the process of transparency and equity? So are you really making decisions within those sorts of processes which are fundamentally principles based, which is what you need if you're having a conversation with a ratepayer as to are your rates fair, transparent and equitable? So the recommended process that's been put up before you is that you have to start with the concept of, well, what are the principles that you wish to underlie the distribution of rates? Is equity a consideration which is a core principle that you wish to actually put into place as a key part of the rating framework? Because at the end of the day, you could argue that you could put rates equitably by household across the entire district. It would be a very, very blunt rating framework, and most people would argue it would certainly not be equitable. It would probably be fair and that it would be transparent, but the question of equity is therefore becomes in doubt. So what I'm trying to say therefore is we have to start with principles. You have to actually start defining what are those principles that you wish to actually put into place and to identify which will drive your rating framework. Because without those principles, you actually can't determine ultimately what rating framework you are going to move to, and you've got no measure to determine whether or not the rating framework you've just discussed is actually effective or not, because you haven't started with a base discussion about what is it you're trying to achieve. So the process is set up to inform, to get your views as to how you see those principles being formed and what you see them being. Then secondly, to also give you the opportunity to be informed and to question those principles against different sections and perceptions of the different communities that we have in Rotorua. Once you get to the end point there, you'll then actually be clear about the principles. You will have actually been able to test those with some of our community stakeholder groups. You've been able to be informed as to are they robust, are there parts to them, and then you can actually test them against our existing rating framework and look at some alternatives potentially as to what could be different. So I would strongly recommend that the general scope or the approach that's been proposed to you with regards to starting with a definition of what does success look like is actually the right process that we should be as an organisation be following.
Thank you for that, Jeff. Councillor Hunt, then Councillor Bentley and Councillor Kent.
Thank you. Just a couple of things, and they're all a little random. One of them is when we have our first workshop and PowerPoint presentation, I understand our workshops are going to be in confidence, but I think the presentation itself would be good if that was made public, because I think having been through a rating review before, it's hugely complicated. And if the dialogue and descriptions describing that is actually available online for people to go and look at, then I think that would be really helpful. One of the things, have we considered a Zoom link for our out-of-town residents? Because they could simply be given a date and a couple of times, emailed a Zoom link. You can have up to 16 or 20 people on it, so that would access that. My understanding of issues on water metering is that should that issue come up, then that becomes an annual plan or a long-term plan conversation. So that's where we can decide, okay, these issues have come up. They don't fit here, but they do fit in those discussions, and then that's a timing. Are we ready? as a community for the cost of that, or are we ready to put it further down the track? The other thing is, do we have the issues of our principles? What we used last time, those principles, are they going to be, again, publicly available and presented in the first time? Because I think if people understand the principles that we made the decisions in the past from, that becomes our starting point. And it's always about how do we allocate what we've got? Who gets it? And when I'm sitting in my corner, I think this is fair. But when I sit in someone else's seat, I actually may change my view. And understanding the helicopter view, not the individual, what I pay, what my friends pay, what my community in a specific pays, but actually how to make that fair across the whole community. And we have to take personality, streets, whether you live here, whether you don't, how many properties you own, all of that out of it. We have to stick with actually the principles of fairness and transparency. So hand on heart, we've made the decision that they're divvied up, this pizza of our rates is divvied up into those slices because on balance, that is the fairest we can make it. It's blunt and there's always outliers. And it's not, it's equally unfair. That's about as much as the wonderful thing about rates. They treat everybody equally unfairly. And as Jenna said, I've yet to meet a person who thinks they don't pay enough in rates. So it's a given, everybody thinks they pay too much. But it's our principles and our values underpinning those principles that we're here to set out first of all. That's the feedback I want from the community. And also the issues that will come up. We'll know whether should we talk about them now and get more detail, or should we talk about them later, either in an annual plan or in the case of revenue streams. That's a significant piece of work that we're never going to have the answer to by the time we need to get past this principle base. So I'm actually very happy with the report as presented, and I say that because last time we dug right into the details and we had the flipper and we went up and down, and honestly, everybody got completely, they couldn't see the wood for the trees, and in fact they couldn't see the city's rates past their own, and that goes for, around the table as well as the community. So we do need to take a much broader view, hear what the issues are, work out whether we can do it in this process, where it sits, and move on from there. So I'm happy to move the committee, and the workshop dates, I understand they're 2 hours prior to every other SPNF, so that's September, October, November, maybe one in December, and then going on from there. But if I think those, the paper stuff or the information we get that could be made public, I think would help the debate, both online and scattered around town and any other platform we can, to help people understand how we're making those decisions. And not so much what does it mean for me, but how we're making them. So I'm happy to move number 2.
Oh, the council obviously. Look, thank you very much for that, Councillor Hunt. Yes, you've been here before. I haven't, in terms of a rate review, so it's very interesting to hear, how detailed and everything it got at that stage and early on, and because everybody does see it from their world view. That it's just natural that you'd look at everything and think, oh, how would that affect me? And so it's good just to know that you do have to step back and try and put yourself, be receptive to looking at it in total rather, and get that helicopter view. So thank you for that. Now there's 2 other councillors, Councillor Bentley and Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I think that my questions and comments are better reserved for a workshop type situation, and yeah, I'll wait till then.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Councillor Kent?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Tapsell. To most people out there, if you start talking about a rating review, they're going to be thinking in terms of a council revenue review. To actually go out there and say, but hang on, we're having a review, but no, we're not going to look at user charges. No, we're not going to look at sustainable development. No, we're not going to include the remissions policy. No, we're not going to look at multiply owned Maori land remissions policies and so on, to me, sounds very much like we're going out to consultation to achieve a predetermined outcome, and that's not what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to go out there and get some ideas as to how we can make this thing more fair. So I think the scope should be widened. I think the time frame should come off, and I think we should do the job once and do it properly, not a bit now, eliminating several parts of it, which is only going to cause people to come back and say, but you didn't consider this, you didn't consider that. So what are you actually achieving other than trying to determine, keep it the status quo? That's basically what you're trying to do here.
It might be interesting that we get feedback from the focus groups that there's actually no issues, and there might be no review at all. So I mean that's the other side of it, and that could well happen. So so we have thank you for that discussion, and I do agree with Councillor Hunt that as much as we can put up on the website after our workshops, that would be great, so that people who want to follow it can see where just see some of the things that we've been discussing. But I think those focus groups will be very helpful too. So we have a mover and a second. It's been moved by Councillor Hunt, seconded by Councillor Donaldson, that the committee recommends that Council adopts the rates review process, timeframes and workshop dates. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. We'll have a show of hands, please. All those in favour? Eight. I think it was 8. I counted 8, did you? So that's carried. Thank you. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, that we go into confidential, and the public are excluded, to adopt the confidential minutes of the previous meeting and to consider the confidential reports on the Polynesian Spa admission charge increase and the Economic Development Partnership. And the reasons that we're going into public excluded is obviously to protect information where the making available of the information would be likely unreasonable to prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied or who is the subject of the information, and B, to enable any local authority holding the information to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage. So could I have a mover and a seconder, please, for the motion that the committee move into public excluded? Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Councillor Donaldson. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried.